The morning Marlene Ashford agreed to marry Ronan Mercer, she owned exactly three things: a dress that had been black once but had faded to something closer to ash, a cloth bag containing $4 silver and 2 copper pennies, and a hairpin her mother had given her before fever took her 12 years back. She stood in the cramped back room of the Black Ridge General Store, studying her reflection in a piece of polished tin nailed to the wall. The woman looking back at her had eyes that had seen too much and a jawline that had learned not to tremble. 28 years old, and every one of them showed in the fine lines around her mouth. "You don't have to do this," Clara Hutchins spoke from the doorway, her round face creased with worry. The storekeeper's wife had been kind to Marlene in the 3 weeks since she'd arrived in Black Ridge, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a story no one particularly wanted to hear. "Don't I?" Marlene's voice came out flatter than she intended. She turned from the tin mirror. "You know another way I can eat that doesn't involve the Silver Rose?" Clara flinched. The Silver Rose was what they called the brothel at the edge of town, though everyone pretended it was a boarding house. 3 women worked there, and Marlene had seen the hollow look in their eyes when they came in to buy flour and soap. "Ronan Mercer's not a bad man," Clara said carefully. "He's just broken. The accident left him crippled, I know." Marlene had heard the story twice already. Ronan Mercer, who used to be the finest horseman in 3 counties, who had built his ranch from nothing and made it profitable when smarter men failed, who had a wife named Catherine that looked like something out of a painting and a future that stretched out golden and endless. Then his horse went down in a gully 18 months ago, shattered his left leg in 4 places. By the time they got him to a doctor 2 towns over, infection had already set in. The doctor saved his life, but couldn't save the leg's function. Ronan Mercer would walk with a cane for the rest of his days, if he walked at all. Catherine left 6 weeks after the accident, packed her belongings into a trunk, and took the stage east without a word of explanation, though everyone in Black Ridge had their theories. A woman like that wasn't going to tie herself to half a man, they said. Beauty had its standards. "The arrangement is practical," Clara continued, lowering her voice though they were alone. "He needs someone to manage the household. You need shelter and respectability. That's all anyone expects it to be. Practical." Marlene repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" She thought about the man she was about to marry. She'd seen him exactly once, 3 days ago, when Pastor Williams had brought her out to the Mercer Ranch to discuss terms. Ronan Mercer had been sitting in a chair by the window, his cane propped against the armrest, his face carved from the same granite as the mountains outside. He hadn't looked at her during the entire conversation, just stared out at the land while the pastor talked about Christian duty and frontier necessity and how a woman alone was vulnerable in ways that marriage could solve. Ronan had said exactly 7 words the entire time. "She'll have her own room. That's final." Not exactly a fairy tale. "The ceremony's in an hour," Clara said gently. "I brought you this." She held out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a piece of white ribbon and a sprig of dried lavender. Marlene felt something crack in her chest, but she forced it back down. Crying wouldn't help. Crying was a luxury she'd lost the right to somewhere between burying her husband Thomas and watching his family auction off everything she'd thought was hers. "Thank you," she managed. Clara squeezed her hand once, then left her alone. Marlene tied the ribbon around her wrist and tucked the lavender into her hair. In the polished tin, she looked like a ghost playing dress-up. She thought about Thomas, dead 3 months now from pneumonia that had started as a simple cold. She thought about his brother Samuel showing up at the door with papers proving Thomas had borrowed money against everything they owned. She thought about the auction, the furniture carried out piece by piece, the house key handed to a stranger while she stood in the yard with nowhere to go. She thought about the long journey west, alone on a wagon train where single women were either protected or preyed upon depending on who was watching. She thought about arriving in Black Ridge with coins running out and winter coming fast and a landlady who'd made it very clear that rent was due in advance. She thought about Pastor Williams pulling her aside after church and saying he knew of a situation that might benefit everyone involved. And now here she was, about to marry a stranger who couldn't walk right and didn't want a wife but needed one anyway for reasons she didn't fully understand and wasn't sure she wanted to. The ceremony took place in the church, which was really just a wooden building with a cross above the door. Maybe 15 people showed up, mostly out of curiosity. Marlene recognized Clara and her husband Albert, and Pastor Williams, obviously, and a few other faces she'd seen around town. Ronan Mercer arrived last. She heard the uneven footsteps before she saw him, the hard strike of the cane, the drag of his left foot, the careful, measured rhythm of someone who'd had to relearn how to move through the world. He came through the door, and Marlene got her first real look at the man she was about to bind herself to. He was taller than she'd remembered, even with the cane, maybe 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to suggest he'd done real work most of his life. His hair was dark brown, long enough to touch his collar, and his face had the kind of hard angles that would have been handsome if there'd been any softness to offset them. But there wasn't. Just sharp cheekbones and a jaw set like he was grinding his teeth and eyes the color of winter storms. He looked at her exactly once as he came down the aisle. A single sweeping glance that took in her faded dress and borrowed ribbon and the lavender already starting to wilt in her hair. His expression didn't change. He might as well have been looking at a fence post. He stopped beside her. She caught the smell of soap and leather and something darker underneath. Pain maybe, or just exhaustion. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his hair at the temples. He was older than she'd thought, probably close to 40. Pastor Williams opened his Bible and started talking about covenant and commitment and the sanctity of marriage. Marlene barely heard him. She was too aware of the man standing rigid beside her, knuckles white around the head of his cane, weight shifted entirely to his right leg. He was hurting. She could see it in the tight set of his mouth, the slight tremor in his shoulder. He'd probably pushed himself too hard getting ready for this, proving he could stand through his own wedding even if it cost him. Stubborn, she thought. That would make things difficult. Do you, Ronan Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was rougher than she expected, like he didn't use it much anymore. And do you, Marlene Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked at Ronan's profile. He was staring straight ahead, jaw locked, every muscle in his body tense, waiting for her to finish the transaction so he could leave. This was it. Last chance to run. She could walk out of this church right now and what? Sleep in the street? Sell herself to survive? Hope some other desperate arrangement came along? I do. Pastor Williams produced 2 rings, plain iron bands that looked like they'd been hammered out in someone's barn. Ronan took one and held it between his thumb and forefinger, waiting. Marlene extended her left hand. It was shaking slightly. She couldn't stop it. Ronan's hand was larger than Thomas's had been, calloused and scarred, with old burns across the knuckles, the hand of someone who'd built things. He slid the ring onto her finger with mechanical efficiency, no tenderness, no ceremony, just a task completed. Then it was her turn. She took the other ring and reached for his hand. He gave it to her stiffly, and she felt the tension in his fingers, the way he was holding himself so carefully still. She slid the ring on. It caught slightly at his knuckle, then settled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ronan pulled his hand back immediately. Marlene let hers fall to her side. You may kiss the bride. Ronan turned to face her for the first time. She saw something flicker in his eyes, anger maybe, or resentment at the performance they were both trapped in. He leaned down, moving carefully around the cane, and pressed his lips to her forehead, quick and cold, the kind of kiss you'd give a sister. Then he straightened, gripped his cane, and turned toward the door. The reception was held at Clara's store because that's where everything in Blackridge happened. Someone had put out coffee and corn cakes, and people milled around making awkward conversation about weather and cattle prices. Marlene stood near the wall, her new ring heavy on her finger, watching her husband talk to an older man about fence repair. Mrs. Mercer, the voice came from her left, smooth and cultured. May I offer my congratulations? She turned to find a man she didn't recognize. He was maybe 35, dressed better than anyone else in the room, a dark suit that actually fit, a vest with silver buttons, boots that had seen polish recently. His hair was the same dark brown as Ronan's, but styled with pomade. His face was softer, more symmetrical, conventionally handsome in a way that probably opened doors. I'm Garrick Mercer, he continued, offering his hand. Ronan's cousin. I apologize for not introducing myself sooner. I've been away on business. Marlene shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and he held it just a moment longer than necessary. Marlene. I know. His smile was practiced, the kind that probably charmed people regularly. It's good that Ronan found someone. That ranch is too much for one man to handle alone, especially now. There was something in the way he said, especially now, that made her skin prickle. Like he was stating a fact everyone knew, but no one said aloud. Your husband is broken, and everyone can see it. I'm sure we'll manage, she said carefully. Of course. Garrick's eyes moved over her face, assessing. If you need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Ronan's not the easiest man to communicate with these days. I try to help where I can, but he has his pride. That's kind of you. Family looks after family. He glanced across the room to where Ronan was still talking about fences, his weight sagging slightly to the right. Even when they don't want it. Before Marlene could respond, Clara appeared with coffee. Garrick excused himself smoothly, and Marlene watched him work the room, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, patting shoulders. He moved through the space like he owned it, all easy confidence and casual authority. She looked back at Ronan. He'd lowered himself into a chair now, probably because standing had become unbearable. His face was blank, but she could see the white-knuckled grip on his cane, the rigid set of his shoulders. He caught her looking, and his expression hardened further, if that was possible. Stop staring, his eyes said. I don't need your pity. She looked away. An hour later, they left for the ranch. Ronan drove the wagon himself, handling the reins with grim determination despite the obvious strain. Marlene sat beside him, her small cloth bag at her feet containing everything she owned in the world. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clop of hooves on packed dirt. Black Ridge fell away behind them. The land opened up, rolling hills covered in dry grass, clusters of pine on the slopes, mountains rising blue and distant to the west. The sky was enormous out here, pale and infinite, making her feel small in a way that was almost comforting. After maybe 30 minutes, Ronan finally spoke. Rules. She glanced at him. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight. All right. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Mine is downstairs. You don't come into my room unless I ask. I don't come into yours. Understood. I'll pay you $10 a month for housekeeping, cooking, cleaning, laundry. You want to do more than that? We'll discuss it, but I'm not asking for it. $10 a month was more than fair, more than generous, actually. That's fine. The ranch operates from dawn to dusk. I expect breakfast at 6 and supper at 7. What you do with the rest of your time is your business. He paused. There's a shelf of books in the parlor. You're welcome to them. Books. That was unexpectedly generous. Thank you. Pastor probably told you I need help with things, reaching things, carrying things. His voice went hard and flat. I don't. I've managed fine for 18 months. I'll keep managing. I understand. I doubt that. He shot her a look, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. Anger, bitter and sharp. You can't possibly understand what it's like to have everyone look at you like you're something broken that needs fixing. So don't pretend you do. Marlene kept her voice level. I was married before, to Thomas Ashford. He died 3 months ago. His family took everything I had and threw me out. I traveled here alone with $6 and nowhere to go. So no, I don't understand what it's like to lose your ability to walk. But I understand what it's like to have your life ripped away and be left with nothing but people's pity. And I hate it just as much as you do. Ronan's jaw worked. He didn't respond, but some of the tension leaked out of his shoulders. After a moment, he gave a single sharp nod, like maybe she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it felt different now. Less hostile, more like two people who'd agreed on terms they could both live with. The ranch appeared as they crested a hill. It was smaller than she'd imagined. A main house, a barn, a few outbuildings, all weathered gray wood that had seen better days. Fences stretched out in uneven lines, and she could see maybe 20 cattle grazing in the distance. Everything looked tired and neglected, like it had been slowly falling apart for months. Ronan pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down stiffly, every movement careful and measured. He grabbed his cane from the footboard and started for the front door without waiting for her. Marlene gathered her bag and followed. Inside, the house was dark and spare. A front room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a hallway leading to what must be Ronan's bedroom. Everything was clean but worn, practical, built to last rather than to impress. No curtains, no rugs, no decoration of any kind, It felt like a place someone was surviving in, not living in. Kitchen's stocked, Ronan said, already moving toward his bedroom. Well's out back. If something breaks, tell me and I'll fix it. He paused at his doorway. Your room has a lock. Use it if you want. Then he went inside and closed the door behind him. She heard the scrape of the chair, the creak of the bed, a long exhale that might have been pain or exhaustion or just relief at being alone again. Marlene stood in the empty parlor, her bag at her feet, and looked around at her new life. This was it. This cold, quiet house with a stranger on the other side of that door. A man who'd made it clear he wanted nothing from her except meals on time and distance otherwise. She thought about Thomas again, the way he used to pull her close in the evenings, talk about plans and dreams like they were things that might actually happen. She thought about the little house they'd rented in Cincinnati, cramped but warm, full of secondhand furniture and hope. That life was gone. This was what she had now. Marlene picked up her bag and climbed the stairs. The room Ronan had given her was small, a bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the empty range. The bed had been made recently, the quilt pulled tight with military precision. On the dresser was a ceramic wash basin and a small mirror. That was it. She set her bag down and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the mountains orange and purple. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called out to the darkening sky. She unpinned the lavender from her hair and set it on the windowsill. The ribbon she left on her wrist. Tomorrow she would start figuring out how to survive in this place, how to cook for a man who didn't want conversation, how to clean a house that didn't feel lived in, how to exist beside someone who'd made loneliness into armor. But tonight she was just tired, bone deep, soul tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Marlene lay down on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under. She woke before dawn to the sound of Ronan moving through the house below. Heavy footsteps, uneven and determined, the thump of his cane on wood floors. She heard the back door open and close. Through her window she could see him heading toward the barn, moving slowly but refusing to stop. Marlene dressed quickly and went downstairs. The kitchen was cold. She got the stove going and found coffee, eggs, bacon wrapped in cloth. By the time Ronan came back in, breakfast was on the table. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. For a second she thought he might say something, maybe thank her, or make some comment about the food. Instead, he just lowered himself into a chair with visible relief and started eating without a word. She poured coffee for both of them and sat across from him. The silence stretched out, broken only by the scrape of fork on plate. She studied him in the morning light. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept. His hair was tangled, and his shirt had a button missing. He caught her looking. Something wrong? No. She looked down at her plate. Just thinking. Don't. She glanced up. Don't what? Think about how to fix me, how to help. Whatever's going through your head right now. He set his fork down, eyes hard. I told you yesterday. I manage fine. You barely slept, you're in pain, and that shirt's missing a button. That's not managing fine, that's just being stubborn. My business, not yours. It's my business if you collapse out there, and I have to drag you back. She kept her voice even. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying not to be a widow twice. Ronan's eyes narrowed. For a long moment he just stared at her, something dangerous flickering behind his expression. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You always this blunt? Usually. Good. I can't stand people who dance around things. He picked up his fork again. But the answer's still no. I don't need help. Noted. They finished breakfast in silence. Ronan stood carefully, gathered his cane, and headed for the door. I'll be in the south pasture checking fences. Be back for supper. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. He left. Marlene sat alone in the kitchen, listening to his uneven footsteps fade. Then she cleared the plates and started washing dishes. The days fell into a pattern. Marlene woke early, made breakfast, cleaned the house, prepared supper. Ronan spent daylight hours working the ranch, coming back exhausted and silent. They ate together, but rarely spoke beyond necessities. Pass the salt. More coffee. The fence in the north section needs repair. She learned the rhythms of the house. How Ronan got up 3 times a night because his leg hurt too much to let him sleep through. how he took longer and longer each morning to make it out to the barn, how some evenings he just sat by the window staring at nothing, his cane propped against the chair, his coffee going cold in his hand. She learned the ranch, too. Walked the property when Ronan was out working. The place was bigger than it looked, nearly 300 acres, though only about half was usable grazing land. The cattle were thin and the fences needed work everywhere. The barn roof had a leak. One of the outbuildings had a broken door hanging on a single hinge. Everything was slowly falling apart, and she could see in Ronan's face that he knew it, that he was watching his life's work crumble and couldn't move fast enough to stop it. On the fourth day, Garrick Mercer rode up to the house just after noon. Marlene was hanging laundry when she saw him coming, sitting easy in the saddle like he'd been born there. He waved when he saw her. Mrs. Mercer. He dismounted smoothly. I hope I'm not intruding. Ronan's out in the south pasture. Actually, I came to see how you were settling in. He smiled that practiced smile. This is a hard life out here for someone not used to it. I'm managing. I'm sure you are. He glanced at the house, the barn, the sagging fences. Still, if you need anything, supplies, help with repairs, I want you to know I'm happy to assist. Ronan's proud. He won't ask for help even when he needs it, but there's no shame in accepting what's offered. There was something in his tone that made Marlene pause. Concern, yes, but something else underneath. Something that felt like assessment, like he was measuring her for something. That's generous, she said carefully, but we're fine. Are you? He looked at her directly now, his expression shifting to something more serious. I don't mean to speak out of turn, but I've known Ronan my whole life. Before the accident, he was different, capable, strong. Now, he trailed off, shaking his head. I just want to make sure you know what you've gotten yourself into. This ranch is struggling. Ronan's struggling. If you need a way out, I don't. Garrick studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, easier this time. Well, the offer stands. For anything. He rode away, and Marlene stood watching him go, unease prickling at the back of her neck. Something about that conversation felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on what. That night at supper, she mentioned Garrick's visit. Ronan's fork stilled halfway to his mouth. What did he want? Just checking in, offering help? What kind of help? Supplies, repairs. He seemed concerned. Ronan's jaw tightened. Garrick's always concerned, right up until he's not. He went back to eating, but the tension in his shoulders had doubled. If he comes around again, tell him we don't need anything. He's your cousin. That's not an answer to what he is. Ronan looked up, and there was something raw in his eyes. Old anger, old pain. Just trust me on this. Stay away from Garrick Mercer. He didn't elaborate, and Marlene didn't push. But she filed the warning away and decided to pay closer attention. The next week, she was cleaning the parlor when she found the ledger. It had fallen behind the bookshelf, probably knocked down and forgotten. She pulled it out and opened it, expecting household accounts. Instead, she found ranch finances going back 3 years. Income from cattle sales, expenses for feed and supplies, notes about contracts and buyers. And as she turned the pages, she started seeing patterns that didn't make sense. Payments that should have come in but were marked delayed or renegotiated. Supply orders that had doubled in price for no clear reason. Contracts that had been mysteriously canceled. And through it all, notes in handwriting that wasn't Ronan's. Spoke to G. Mercer regarding adjustment. And G. Mercer handling negotiations, and per G. Mercer's recommendation. Garrick's name, over and over, always connected to things that had cost the ranch money or opportunity. Marlene sat on the floor, the ledger open in her lap, and felt the pieces starting to come together. The ranch's decline, Ronan's isolation, Garrick's helpful concern and polished concern. She thought about what Garrick had said. This ranch is struggling, Ronan's struggling, like it was inevitable. Like it was just bad luck. But what if it wasn't? Footsteps on the porch. The door opened and Ronan came in, limping worse than usual. He saw her sitting there with the ledger and stopped. What are you doing? Marlene looked up at him. At this man who'd been betrayed by his body, maybe his wife, possibly his family, and was still dragging himself out every morning to try to save what was left. Learning, she said quietly. Just learning. Something flickered across his face, Suspicion, maybe, or the faint hope that she might be someone he could trust. He was too tired to hide it completely, and for just a second she saw past all his walls to the man underneath. Someone who'd been strong once and was terrified he'd never be strong again. Someone who'd built something and was watching it die. Someone who was utterly, desperately alone. "Supper's ready," she said, closing the ledger. "Whenever you're hungry." Ronan nodded slowly. He didn't ask what she'd found. Maybe he was afraid to know. Maybe he already knew and couldn't face it yet. He went to wash up, and Marlene put the ledger back behind the bookshelf, but she'd memorized enough. Dates and names and numbers that told a story if you knew how to read them. And she was starting to learn how to read this place. Its silences and its secrets. The way pain could make people dangerous, and the way loneliness could make them vulnerable. She was starting to understand what she'd married into. Not just a practical arrangement with a broken man, but something deeper and darker. A slow betrayal that had been happening for months or maybe years, so subtle that the victim never saw it coming. But Marlene saw it now, and she was already starting to wonder what she was going to do about it. The ledger haunted Marlene for days. She kept finding excuses to pull it out when Ronan was working the far pastures, tracing the entries with her finger, trying to make sense of the patterns she'd seen. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole story either, just fragments, suggestions, the shape of something wrong without proof of what it was. She was careful not to let it show. Breakfast at 6, supper at 7, everything running smooth as clockwork. But her mind was working through the problem like picking at a knot, patient, persistent, looking for the thread that would make everything unravel. On the 9th day of her marriage, she was scrubbing the kitchen floor when she heard the wagon coming up the drive. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked out to see Ronan returning from town earlier than expected. His face was set in hard lines, and even from a distance she could see the tension in his shoulders. He pulled up to the house and climbed down with more force than care, nearly stumbling on his bad leg. His cane hit the ground like a weapon. They canceled the contract. He said it flat, without preamble, as he came through the door. Marlene set down the scrub brush. "What contract?" "Cattle. The buyer in Denver. I had 40 head ready to ship next month. Good stock, best I've raised in 2 years. He threw his hat on the table. "They sent word this morning, no longer interested. No explanation, just canceled." "Can you find another buyer?" "Not at this point. Season's nearly over. Everyone's already committed." He lowered himself into a chair, his legs stretched out stiff in front of him. "That was 3 months of work. Feed costs. Time. All of it gone because some buyer 200 miles away decided on a whim to walk away." Marlene watched him carefully. His jaw was working, hands gripped tight on the arms of the chair. Anger was easier than despair, and she could see him choosing it deliberately, using it to keep something worse at bay. "Who arranged the contract?" she asked. "What?" "The original contract with the Denver buyer. Who set it up?" Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Garrick did. He has connections in Denver. I don't." He paused. "Why?" "Just wondering." She went back to scrubbing the floor, but her mind was racing. Another entry for the ledger. Another place where Garrick's involvement preceded disaster. That afternoon, while Ronan was in the barn doing something that required hammering and cursing in equal measure, Marlene walked the property again. She'd started doing this most days, ostensibly checking for things that needed attention, but really just trying to understand the layout of the land and how everything connected. The cattle were scattered across the southern pasture, grazing on grass that was thin but serviceable. She counted them carefully. 43 head, most of them in decent condition despite everything. A few looked underweight, but nothing serious. Nothing that would explain the ranch's financial troubles. She followed the fence line north, noting places where posts had rotted or wire had come loose. Repair work that should have been done months ago. Work that Ronan couldn't do alone, not with his leg, but was trying to do anyway out of sheer stubbornness. Near the property's eastern boundary, she found something that made her stop. Fresh wagon tracks, maybe a day old, leading from the main road to a section of fence that had been cut and poorly repaired. The wire was newer than the rest, hastily twisted back together like someone had been in a hurry. She knelt down studying the tracks. Heavy wagon, 2 horses. Came in from the road, stopped here for maybe 20 minutes based on how the hoof prints overlapped, then headed back out. And right where the wagon had stopped, the fence showed signs of being deliberately cut. Someone had come onto Mercer land without permission, cut through the fence, and left. Recently, Marlene stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and looked around. From here you could see most of the southern pasture. Perfect vantage point if you wanted to observe the herd without being noticed from the house. She filed it away and kept walking. That evening, Ronan was quieter than usual. He picked at his food, barely eating, staring at something in the middle distance. The canceled contract was eating at him. She could see it in the defeated slope of his shoulders, the way he'd given up on maintaining the armor. "There's other options," she said finally. He looked up, eyes dull. "What?" "For the cattle. You could sell locally, lower price, but at least you'd have something. I've already committed the money from that contract. Feed orders, supplies, fence repairs. I was counting on that income." He set down his fork. "Without it, I'm short. Badly short." "How short?" He gave her a long look, deciding whether to answer. "Enough that I'll probably have to sell off some of the breeding stock, which means next year's herd will be smaller, which means less income then too. It's a spiral. Once it starts, it doesn't stop." Marlene understood what he wasn't saying, that this was how ranches died. Slowly, then all at once. You sold off your future to survive the present, and eventually there was nothing left to sell. "The books," she said carefully. "The ranch ledger. May I see it?" Ronan's expression hardened. "Why?" "Because I used to keep books for my husband's business, before he died." It was true, mostly. Thomas had run a small freight operation, and Marlene had handled the accounts. She'd been good at it, too, better than Thomas, though neither of them had said that out loud. "Let me look at the numbers. Maybe I'll see something you missed." "There's nothing to see, just a ranch losing money. Then it won't hurt for me to look." He studied her for a long moment, suspicion and exhaustion warring in his face. Finally, he pushed back from the table and went to the desk in the corner, pulling out a leather-bound ledger, different from the one she'd found, newer. He dropped it in front of her. "Knock yourself out." She opened it and started going through the entries. This ledger was more recent, covering just the last year. Ronan's handwriting, mostly, with occasional notes in someone else's hand. She recognized some of the patterns from the older ledger, but here they were more pronounced. Expenses climbing steadily while income dropped. Contracts falling through. Buyers backing out. Suppliers raising prices. And there, in the margins, those same notes. Purgy Mercer, and handled by GM, and Garrick arranged delivery. She looked up. "Your cousin helps with the business side?" "Used to. He's got connections I don't. Buyers, suppliers, bankers. Made sense to use them." Ronan's voice was careful, like he was picking his way across ice. "After the accident, I couldn't travel like I used to. Garrick offered to handle negotiations. I was grateful. And things started going wrong after that?" Ronan went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything. I'm asking." She kept her voice neutral. "When did the financial problems start? Before the accident or after?" He didn't answer right away. She could see him thinking back, connecting dots he'd maybe been avoiding. "After," he said slowly. "Couple months after. I thought it was because I couldn't manage things properly anymore. Because I was..." He stopped, jaw tight. "Broken," Marlene finished quietly. "Yeah." The word came out bitter. She turned a few more pages, reading entries with new eyes now that she knew what to look for. "These supply prices, are they normal?" "What do you mean?" "Feed costs here are almost double what I remember paying in Cincinnati. And these equipment repairs, does it really cost $70 to fix a wagon wheel?" Ronan leaned forward, looking at where she was pointing. "That's what the invoice said." "Did you see the actual repair work?" "Garrick handled it. He has a contact in town who does metal work." He paused. "You think I'm being cheated?" "I think someone who wants to run a ranch into the ground would do exactly this. Inflate costs, cancel contracts, create problems that look like bad luck." She met his eyes. "And they'd be very helpful while doing it. Very concerned. Always offering to handle the difficult parts." Ronan's face had gone pale. Not with fear, with rage. Cold, controlled rage that was somehow worse than shouting. "If Garrick's been stealing from me, I don't have proof. Just numbers that don't add up and a lot of coincidences. She closed the ledger. But I'd like to keep looking, if you'll let me. He stared at the ledger like it was a rattlesnake. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Why would you do this? You barely know me. This isn't your fight. I'm your wife. Your fight is my fight. That's how this works. She said it matter-of-factly, though the word wife still felt strange in her mouth. Besides, I don't like being played for a fool. If someone's running a con, I want to know. Ronan searched her face, looking for something. Agenda, maybe. Angle. Some reason not to trust her. But whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he gave a short nod. All right. But be careful. If you're right about Garrick... He trailed off, then shook his head. Just be careful. After that, things shifted. Not dramatically. Ronan was still distant, still guarded, still limping through each day with grim determination. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now. Like maybe she wasn't just another burden he had to carry. The next morning, Garrick showed up again. Marlene was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from the small vegetable patch someone had planted years ago, and mostly abandoned. She heard the horse and stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Garrick rode up with that same easy confidence, dismounting smoothly. He was dressed well again, pressed shirt, clean vest, boots that probably cost more than her wedding dress. Mrs. Mercer, working hard, I see. Mr. Mercer. She didn't bother with warmth. Please, call me Garrick. We're family now. He glanced toward the house. Is Ronan around? In the barn. Ah. Well, perhaps I could speak with you for a moment. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I heard about the Denver contract falling through. Terrible luck. Seems to be a lot of that going around. Indeed. He studied her with that assessing look again, like he was trying to figure out what she knew. I wanted to offer my assistance. I have some contacts who might be interested in purchasing cattle locally. Lower price than Denver, of course, but better than nothing. That's generous. I also wanted to discuss Ronan's condition. Garrick's voice dropped, taking on a tone of concern that felt rehearsed. I'm worried about him. He's not managing well, is he? The ranch is suffering. His health is suffering. I'm wondering if perhaps it's time to consider other options. Marlene felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of options? Well, Garrick spread his hands. Selling, obviously. The land is valuable even if the operation isn't profitable. Ronan could get a fair price, move somewhere easier, somewhere he wouldn't have to work so hard. It might be the kindest thing. I don't think Ronan wants to sell. What Ronan wants and what's best for him might be two different things. Garrick's expression turned sympathetic. You seem like a practical woman, Mrs. Mercer. You can see how this is going to end. The ranch fails, Ronan loses everything anyway, but only after years of struggle and disappointment. Wouldn't it be better to sell now, while there's still equity, while he still has options? There it was, the real reason for all the helpful concern. Garrick wanted the ranch. I'll mention it to him, Marlene said carefully. Do. And if you need any assistance convincing him... Garrick pulled a folded paper from his pocket. This is an offer from a buyer I know. Very fair terms. More than fair, actually, considering the current state of things. Just something to think about. He held it out. Marlene took it, feeling the weight of it in her hand like evidence. I appreciate your concern for your cousin, she said, but I think Ronan's stronger than you're giving him credit for. Something flickered in Garrick's eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. I hope you're right. For everyone's sake. He mounted his horse again, movements fluid and practiced. I'll check back in a few days, see how you're both doing. He rode away, and Marlene stood holding the paper, feeling like she'd just been handed a threat wrapped in silk. She found Ronan in the barn, mending tack with careful, angry precision. His hands were bleeding slightly where he'd pricked himself with the needle, but he didn't seem to notice. Garrick was here, she said. Ronan's hands stilled. What did he want? To offer you a way out. He has a buyer interested in the ranch. She held out the paper. Very generous terms, apparently. Ronan took it, scanned it quickly, then crumpled it in his fist. Of course he does. He's trying to pressure you to sell. He's been trying for months. Ronan threw the paper into the corner. Started right after the accident. Kept saying I should think about my future, consider my options, All that careful language that means you're finished, give up. I told him no every time, so he stopped asking directly and started making sure you'd fail. Yeah, Ronan's voice was hollow. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe it. Family doesn't... He stopped, shook his head. But I guess blood doesn't mean much when there's money involved. Marlene moved closer, studying his face. What happens if you lose the ranch? I have nothing. Literally nothing. This land is everything I built. Everything I am. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. I can't lose it. I won't. Then we won't let you. We. He said it like he was testing the word. You mean that? I married you, didn't I? For better or worse, even if neither of us got to choose which one. She pulled up a stool and sat down. Here's what I think is happening. Garrick wants this ranch, has for a while maybe. When you got hurt, he saw an opportunity. Start sabotaging your operations, make it look like natural decline, wait for you to get desperate enough to sell. He gets the land cheap, you get whatever scraps he's willing to throw you, everyone thinks it's just sad luck. So how do we stop him? Proof. Real proof, not just suspicious numbers. Marlene thought for a moment. That Denver contract, do you have the name of the buyer? James Holloway, runs a meatpacking operation. Can you write to him? Ask why he canceled? Ronan frowned. What good would that do? Maybe none. Or maybe he'll tell you something interesting, like maybe someone convinced him the cattle weren't good quality, or that you were unreliable, or offered him a better deal elsewhere. She stood. It's worth trying. All right. Ronan studied her with something that might have been respect. You're good at this. The scheming part. I had good teachers. My husband's family were experts at finding ways to take what wasn't theirs. She said it without bitterness, just fact. I learned a lot watching them work. Sorry that happened to you. I'm not. Not anymore. Means I recognize the pattern when I see it again. She moved toward the door, then paused. Ronan? Don't tell Garrick we're looking into things. Keep acting like everything's normal, like you're still broken and helpless, and one bad month away from giving up. His mouth tightened. I hate that. I know. But if he thinks we're on to him, he'll cover his tracks. Better if he feels secure. You're asking me to play weak. I'm asking you to be smart. She met his eyes. There's a difference between weak and strategic. You're not the first one, but you could be the second if you're willing. Ronan's jaw worked. Pride versus pragmatism, fighting it out behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Fine, but I'm not doing it forever. Just long enough to hang him with his own rope. That got almost a smile. Remind me not to cross you. Good advice. She left him to his tack and went back to the house. Inside, she pulled out both ledgers, the old one from behind the bookshelf and the current one Ronan had given her, and started making notes. Dates, amounts, names, building a timeline of when things had started going wrong, and what Garrick's involvement had been at each step. The work was painstaking and her hand cramped after an hour, but she kept going. This was something she understood. Numbers were honest even when people weren't. You just had to know how to read them. She was still at it when Ronan came in for supper. He glanced at the papers spread across the table but didn't comment, just washed up and sat down. They ate in silence, but it was companionable now. The silence of two people working the same problem from different angles. After the meal, Ronan pulled out paper and ink. That letter to Holloway. Help me write it? They worked on it together, Marlene suggesting phrasing that would invite honest response without revealing too much. Keep it light. Keep it curious. Don't sound desperate or accusatory. When they finished, Ronan signed it and sealed it with wax. I'll take it to town tomorrow. Mail goes out Tuesday. Good. Marlene gathered the ledgers. I'm going to keep going through these. Let me know if you remember anything else that seemed off. Deals that fell through, supplies that didn't arrive, anything. There's been a lot of that. Write it down. Dates if you remember them. He nodded slowly, then surprisingly, thank you for this, for caring enough to look. You're welcome. That night, Marlene lay in bed listening to Ronan pace downstairs. His leg always hurt worse at night, and he rarely slept more than a few hours at a stretch. She'd hear him moving through the house, the rhythm of cane and footsteps, the creak of the chair by the window where he'd sit and stare at darkness. She wanted to help, but she knew he'd reject it. Pride was all he had left, and she wouldn't be the one to take that too. So she listened and made plans and waited for morning. The next few days passed in careful normalcy. Ronan took the letter to town and came back without incident. Marlene continued her work with the ledgers, building her case piece by piece. They didn't talk about it much, but there was an understanding between them now. They were in this together, whether they'd wanted to be or not. On the fourth day, Marlene was cleaning the kitchen when she noticed something odd. The pantry supplies were running lower than they should be. She'd done inventory just 3 days ago, and they should have had plenty of flour and coffee and salt. But now the flour sack was half empty, and the coffee tin was nearly gone. She checked her notes. The consumption didn't match what they'd actually used. Someone had been at the house while they were both outside, taking just enough that it might go unnoticed, but not so much that it was obvious theft. Marlene said nothing to Ronan. Instead, she started paying closer attention. The next day, she deliberately left the house for an hour, making a show of going to check the cattle in the far pasture. When she came back, she checked the pantry again. More coffee gone. And this time, she noticed something else. Muddy boot prints in the kitchen, size and tread different from either hers or Ronan's. Someone was coming into the house when they weren't around. The question was who and why. She thought about the cut fence, the wagon tracks, the supplies disappearing. Pieces of something, but she couldn't see the full picture yet. That evening, she asked Ronan about the property boundaries. Is there a map? Old survey map in the desk. Why? Just curious about the layout. She found the map and spread it out on the table. The Mercer Ranch was roughly rectangular, with the main house near the southern end. The northern section bordered government land, open range that anyone could use. The eastern boundary ran along Bitter Creek, and the western edge. She traced the line with her finger. The western edge bordered another ranch, larger spread, better land. The ownership was marked G. Mercer. Garrick owns the ranch next door? Ronan glanced over. Inherited it from his father 5 years ago. 3,000 acres, good water, better grazing than mine. He's done well with it. Then why does he want yours? Access. Ronan came over, pointing at the map. See how his land is shaped? It's blocked on 3 sides by mountains. The only easy way to get cattle to market is through my property. Right now, he has an easement, legal right to drive his herd through my land twice a year. But if he owned both ranches, he trailed off, seeing where she was going. He'd control the entire route to market, could charge other ranchers for access, set up toll roads, basically control all the cattle trade in this area. Yeah, Ronan's voice was grim. I never thought, we're family. I figured the easement was enough, but if you're right about what he's been doing, it's not about family, it's about money. Marlene rolled up the map. And if he's willing to sabotage you financially, what else is he willing to do? They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. The accident. The horse going down in a gully, shattering Ronan's leg. Everyone had called it bad luck, a tragic accident, but what if it wasn't? No, Ronan said, reading her expression. No, even Garrick wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Hurt his own cousin. Marlene kept her voice level. You said yourself he's been pushing you to sell for months. Started right after the accident. What if the accident was the start of his plan, not just an opportunity? Ronan had gone pale. You're talking about attempted murder. I'm talking about someone who wants your land badly enough to ruin you financially. The question is how badly, and how far would he go? I need to sit down. She helped him to a chair. His hands were shaking slightly, and she could see the wheels turning in his head, replaying that day 18 months ago, looking for signs he'd missed. I was riding the north fence line, he said slowly, checking for breaks. Garrick was with me. He'd offered to help, said he wanted to spend time together like we used to before. He stopped. The horse spooked, reared up, threw me. I hit hard, started sliding down the embankment. The horse lost its footing trying to stop, came down on top of me, landed right on my leg. What spooked it? I don't know. I didn't see. 1 second we were riding, the next. He looked up at her. Garrick was behind me. He would have seen, but he said he didn't notice anything, just that the horse suddenly bolted. Marlene felt that cold certainty settling deeper. And then? Then he rode for help, got me to the doctor, stayed with me while they operated. He was... Ronan's voice cracked. He was kind, supportive, told me everything would be all right. right up until he started quietly destroying everything you'd built. Ronan put his head in his hands. I trusted him. My whole life I trusted him. She wanted to offer comfort but didn't know how. So she just put her hand on his shoulder, solid and real, and let him process it. After a long moment, he looked up. His eyes were red but dry. We need proof. Real, hard proof. Because if we accuse him without it, he'll destroy us. I know. So how do we get it? Marlene thought about the pantry thefts, the cut fence, the wagon tracks. The pieces were there. She just needed to figure out how they connected. We watch, she said finally. We pay attention. And we wait for him to make a mistake. What if he doesn't? Everyone makes mistakes eventually, especially people who think they're smarter than everyone else. She squeezed his shoulder once, then let go. We'll catch him. I promise you that. Ronan studied her face, and something in his expression shifted, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not just the practical arrangement, the convenient solution to his household problems, but an actual person. Someone capable and determined and maybe a little dangerous when pushed. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Neither are you. That almost got a smile. Fair enough. The next morning, Marlene made a decision. While Ronan was out checking the herd, she searched the house more carefully, looking for anything that might have been disturbed, anything that seemed out of place. In the desk drawer, she found correspondence she'd seen before, but this time she noticed something. Several letters were missing. She could see the gaps in the dates, January, March, early April. Letters that should be there, but weren't. She checked the current ledger again. Those missing months corresponded with some of the first contract problems. The canceled orders, the supply issues. Someone had taken the letters, probably whoever was sneaking into the house. She was still thinking about it when she heard a horse approaching. Not Ronan's horse. She knew that sound now. This was different, faster, more aggressive. Marlene went to the window and felt her stomach drop. Garrick was riding up to the house, and he wasn't alone. Two men were with him, rough-looking types with guns on their hips. Range detectives, maybe, or hired muscle. Hard to tell the difference out here. She met them on the porch, blocking the door. Mr. Mercer? Mrs. Mercer? Garrick's smile was thin. I need to speak with Ronan. Is he here? Out with the cattle. Can I help you? I'm afraid not. This is ranch business. He gestured to the men with him. These gentlemen are from the Black Ridge Cattlemen's Association. There's been some concern about property boundaries and easement violations. We need to conduct a survey. A survey? Yes, just routine, making sure everyone's fences are where they should be. His eyes were cold despite the pleasant tone. I'm sure Ronan won't mind. She did mind, but she also knew she couldn't stop them without Ronan here. I'll let him know you stopped by. Actually, we'll wait. Garrick dismounted. This shouldn't take long. The three men spread out, walking the property line near the house. Marlene watched them, her mind racing. This wasn't about surveys. This was intimidation, a show of force. Garrick was sending a message. I can bring trouble to your door anytime I want. One of the men, a big guy with a scarred face, wandered toward the barn. Marlene followed at a distance, trying to see what he was looking at. He examined the fence line, made some notes, moved on to check the outbuildings. Then she saw him pause near the back of the barn. He knelt down, looking at something on the ground. When he stood up, he was holding a piece of wire. New wire, the kind used for fence repair. He showed it to Garrick, and they had a quiet conversation Marlene couldn't hear. But she saw Garrick's expression change, saw him look at the barn, then back at the wire, then toward the house. He was planning something. She could see it in the way he moved, the way he gestured to his men. They were setting something up. She needed to warn Ronan, now. Marlene went back in the house, grabbed her shawl, and headed toward the pasture. She was halfway there when she saw Ronan riding back, probably having seen the horses by the house. Garrick's here, she called out as soon as he was close enough. With two men. They're saying something about a property survey, but it's not. They're looking for something, or planting something. I'm not sure which. Ronan's expression hardened. Stay behind me. They rode back to the house together. Garrick and his men were waiting by the porch, and Marlene noticed they'd positioned themselves between Ronan and the barn. Cousin. Garrick's voice was smooth. We need to talk. Then talk. Ronan dismounted carefully, using his cane for balance. There's been some concerns raised. Missing cattle from my property, tracks leading to your land. Garrick's face was sympathetic, but his eyes were calculating. I'm sure there's an explanation, but the association needs to investigate. You're accusing me of rustling? I'm not accusing anyone, just stating facts. Cattle missing, tracks leading here. These gentlemen need to check your herd, see if any of my stock got mixed in accidentally. It was brilliant in a terrible way. If they found Garrick's cattle on Ronan's land, cattle that had probably been driven here deliberately, Ronan would be finished. Rustling was a hanging offense in some places, and even without that it would destroy his reputation completely. No one would do business with a suspected thief. Check whatever you want, Ronan said, his voice tight. You won't find anything. I hope you're right. Garrick nodded to his men who headed toward the pasture. Marlene watched them go, her mind working furiously. This was the move. This was how Garrick planned to end it. Frame Ronan for theft. Force him to sell to avoid prosecution. Clean, simple, devastating. She looked at Ronan. His face was pale but composed, jaw set in that stubborn line she'd come to recognize. He knew what was happening, knew he was being set up, and couldn't do anything to stop it. Unless an idea hit her, desperate and probably stupid, but maybe their only chance. Ronan, she said quietly, when they check the cattle, how will they know which ones are Garrick's? Brands. Each ranch has its own. And yours is different from his? Of course, mine's an M with a bar through it. His is a crossed G. So if they find cattle with his brand in your herd, that's proof they came from his ranch. Yeah. Ronan's voice was hollow. That's how it works. Marlene looked at Garrick, who was watching them with that careful, pleased expression. The look of someone who'd played his final card and knew he'd won. What if we found his cattle on his land? She said quietly. Ronan frowned. What? The fence. The cut fence I found near the eastern boundary. The wagon tracks. What if someone drove cattle from his ranch onto his own land, planning to later claim they were driven onto yours? They'd need to stage them somewhere first, somewhere between his ranch and this one. Understanding flickered in Ronan's eyes. Government land. The north section. Can we get there before they finish checking your herd? Maybe. If we go now. He turned to Garrick. Mind if I ride along with your men? Want to make sure they don't miss anything. Garrick's smile tightened slightly. Of course. I'll accompany you as well. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings. They were all playing chess now, each move calculated. Garrick couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. But he also couldn't let Ronan out of his sight, which was fine. Marlene hadn't planned on Ronan going anywhere. Actually, she said, I'd like to check something first. That north section you mentioned, the government land. I thought I saw some of your cattle up there yesterday. Might have wandered through a gap in the fence. It was a gamble. If she was wrong, she'd just look foolish. But if she was right, Garrick's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation. Worry. The north section is quite far. Perhaps after won't take long, Marlene said pleasantly. Just want to make sure we're not wasting anyone's time down here if the cattle are actually up there. She started walking toward her horse. Behind her, she heard Garrick say something sharp to one of his men. Heard footsteps following her. She'd hit a nerve. Ronan caught up to her, moving as fast as his leg would allow. You sure about this? No, but we don't have better options. They mounted up and headed north, Garrick and his men following close behind. The ride took 20 minutes, climbing into rougher terrain where the grass grew thicker and the trees clustered in dark stands. And there, in a small valley just across the property line onto government land, was exactly what Marlene had hoped to find. Cattle. Maybe 15 head, all bearing Garrick's crossed G brand. Penned in a makeshift corral that had been recently built, hidden from casual view, but easy enough to move once the time was right. Ronan pulled up short, staring. Then he turned to look at Garrick, and his face was terrible. Interesting, he said quietly. These look like your cattle, cousin. On government land. Almost like someone was staging them here, planning to drive them onto my property later so they could find them and accuse me of theft. Garrick's face had gone blank. No more smiles, no more careful concern. just cold assessment. That's quite a theory. Is it? Because it explains a lot. The cut fence, the wagon tracks, the missing supplies from my house. You needed to feed them while they waited here, didn't you? That's why you kept coming around, why you had access when we were both out working. Ronan's voice was rising now, fury breaking through. You set this whole thing up. The rustling accusation was supposed to be the final blow, the thing that would force me to sell or face prison. You can't prove any of that, can I? Marlene spoke up. Because I've been keeping track, dates, amounts, every suspicious thing that's happened since the accident. And I found your correspondence with the Denver buyer, the one who canceled the contract. Want to guess what it says? She was bluffing. She didn't have any such letter. But Garrick didn't know that, and his face had gone white. You've been playing a long game, Ronan continued, ever since the accident. Maybe before. Making me fail slowly so when you finally pushed me to sell, it would look like mercy instead of murder. Murder? Garrick laughed, but it sounded forced. You're delusional. Am I? What spooked my horse that day, Garrick? What did you do? Nothing. It was an accident. Was it? Ronan urged his horse forward, and Garrick's men tensed. Because I've been thinking about it a lot lately. And you know what I remember? Right before the horse bolted, I heard something, like a gunshot, but not quite. More like a firecracker, Marlene finished, suddenly understanding. Something loud enough to spook a horse, but quiet enough that it could be mistaken for other sounds. And you were right behind him, close enough to throw it. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cattle seemed to sense the tension, shifting nervously in their pen. Garrick's face had gone from white to red. This is insane. You're both insane. Then prove it. Ronan's voice was deadly calm now. Let's go back to town. Bring the sheriff. Show him these cattle. Explain how they ended up here. Let him investigate the books, the contracts, all of it. If we're wrong, we'll apologize, and you'll have grounds to sue us for slander. But if we're right, he let that hang in the air. Garrick looked at his men, weighing options. Marlene saw the moment he made his decision, saw his hand move toward his hip where a pistol hung. "Ronan!" she shouted. But Ronan had seen it too. He threw himself sideways off his horse, hitting the ground hard, rolling. The shot went wild, cracking through the air where he'd been a second before. One of Garrick's men went for his gun. Marlene kicked her horse forward, slamming into his mount. Both animals reared, and the man went down cursing. Then the world became chaos. Shouting, horses screaming, another gunshot. Marlene lost track of where everyone was. She saw Ronan on the ground, scrambling for his cane which had fallen out of reach. Saw Garrick leveling his pistol, taking aim. She didn't think, just acted, threw herself from her horse directly at Garrick, hitting him with all her weight. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and dirt. The gun went off next to her ear, deafening. She felt the heat of it, but not pain, which meant she hadn't been hit. Garrick was shouting something, trying to push her off. She grabbed for the pistol, got her hands on his wrist, held on. Then Ronan was there, his cane coming down hard on Garrick's arm. The pistol dropped. Ronan snatched it up and leveled it at his cousin's face. "Don't!" Just one word, but it carried the weight of 18 months of betrayal and pain. Garrick froze. The two men had scattered. One was remounting his horse, the other already riding hard back toward town. Smart enough to know when a plan had fallen apart. Ronan kept the gun steady despite his shaking hands. "Get up, slowly." Garrick stood, his face twisted with rage and something uglier, desperation. A man who'd played for everything and lost. "This doesn't prove anything," he said. "It's your word against mine. And everyone knows you're broken." Ronan's voice was quiet. "Yeah, I know what they say. But here's the thing, cousin. I might be broken, but I'm not stupid. And neither is my wife. Between the two of us, we've got enough evidence to bury you. The only question is whether we do it publicly or give you a chance to walk away." Marlene stood, brushing dirt from her dress. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline, but her voice was steady. "If you go now, tonight, and don't come back, we won't pursue charges. You lose the easement, you lose any claim to this land, and you stay away from Black Ridge. Forever. And if I refuse, then we take everything we've found to the sheriff. The cattle, the books, the correspondence. We make sure everyone knows what you did, how you betrayed your own family, How you tried to steal a man's livelihood and maybe his life. She met his eyes. Your choice, but choose fast because my patience is running thin. Garrick looked between them, calculating odds. Finally, his shoulders sagged. You can't prove the accident. Maybe not. But we can prove everything else. And once people start looking at you with suspicion, they'll wonder. They'll ask questions. Is that really what you want? It wasn't. She could see it in his face. The cold arithmetic of a man who'd lost but might still escape consequence if he moved fast enough. Keep the ranch, he spat. Keep all of it, but don't think this is over. It is, Ronan said flatly. The second you ride away from here, it's over. Because if you ever come near my property or my wife again, I won't bother with sheriffs or courts. I'll handle it personally. Understood? Garrick mounted his horse, his movements jerky with suppressed fury. You always were too trusting, Ronan. Too soft. That's why you'll fail eventually. Because the world doesn't reward people like you. Maybe. Ronan lowered the pistol, but didn't put it away. But at least I can sleep at night. They watched Garrick ride away, his figure getting smaller until it disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Ronan lower the gun completely, his hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. We should have held him, he said, made him face consequences. He will face them, just not from us. Marlene took the pistol from his hands and tucked it in her belt. His reputation is finished. Everyone will know he accused you of rustling and then ran. They'll put the pieces together. Maybe. Definitely. She looked at the penned cattle. What do we do with these? Drive them back to his ranch. Let whoever he left in charge deal with them. Ronan sagged suddenly, the energy draining out of him. I need to sit down. She helped him to a fallen log, and he collapsed onto it with a groan. His bad leg was stretched out stiff, and she could see pain written in every line of his face. That was stupid, he said after a moment, throwing yourself at an armed man. Probably. You could have been killed. So could you. She sat down beside him. We're even. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Thank you for believing me, for fighting for this place when you barely know it. You didn't have to do any of this. Yes, I did. We're... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Partners? Allies? More than that, but less than the word wife usually meant? We're something, Ronan finished quietly. I don't know what yet, but we're something. They sat in silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The cattle shifted in their pen, and somewhere a bird called out to the gathering dusk. After a while, Ronan spoke again. I thought I was finished. After the accident, after Catherine left, after everything started falling apart, I thought that was it, the end of the story, just waiting for the final page to turn. But maybe there's more story left. Maybe it's just different than I planned. He glanced at her. Thanks to you. Marlene didn't know what to say to that, so she just reached over and took his hand, rough and scarred and real, and held it while the light died and the stars came out one by one above the sleeping ranch. They drove Garrick's cattle back to his property line that night, left them in a pasture where his remaining hands would find them come morning. Neither Marlene nor Ronan spoke much during the work. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both wrung out and shaky. By the time they made it back to the ranch house, it was past midnight, and Ronan could barely stay upright. Marlene helped him inside, not asking permission this time. He was too exhausted to argue. She got him to his room, pulled off his boots while he sat on the edge of the bed, breathing hard through his teeth. Legs bad, he managed. I know. She fetched water and the bottle of laudanum she'd seen in the kitchen cabinet. Take some. You need sleep. He drank it without protest, which told her exactly how much pain he was in. Within minutes, his eyes were drooping. She left him there and climbed the stairs to her own room, every muscle in her body screaming. Sleep came fast, but it wasn't restful. She kept seeing Garrick's pistol, kept feeling that moment when she'd thrown herself at him without thinking. Stupid. Ronan had been right about that. She could have died, but she hadn't, and somehow they'd won. She woke before dawn to silence. No footsteps below. No sound of Ronan moving through the house. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find his bedroom door still closed. He was sleeping, actually sleeping, for the first time since she'd arrived. She made coffee quietly and stood by the kitchen window watching the sun come up. Today would bring consequences. Garrick's men would talk. Word would spread through Black Ridge like wildfire. By noon, everyone would know something had happened, and by evening, they'd have 10 different versions of what. The truth would be somewhere in the middle, tangled up with speculation and rumor. But the core of it, that Garrick Mercer had tried to frame his own cousin and been caught, that part would stick. That was the kind of scandal small towns fed on for years. Ronan emerged around 8, moving slowly but with less pain in his face than usual. The laudanum had given him real rest, maybe the first in months. He poured coffee and sat across from her without a word. They were halfway through breakfast when they heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Marlene and Ronan exchanged glances. "Sheriff, probably," Ronan said. "Garrick's men would have gone straight to him." "What do we tell him?" "The truth, all of it." Ronan stood, reaching for his cane. "Let's get this over with." Sheriff Dawes was a thick man in his 50s with a face like worn leather and eyes that missed nothing. He came to the door with 2 deputies, all 3 wearing expressions that said this wasn't a social call. "Ronan, Mrs. Mercer." Dawes' voice was neutral. "Need to ask you both some questions about what happened yesterday." "Come in." Ronan stepped back, letting them enter. They gathered in the parlor, the deputies standing while Dawes took a chair across from Ronan and Marlene. The sheriff pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. "Got an interesting report this morning. 2 men claiming you and your wife attacked Garrick Mercer without provocation. Accused him of crimes without evidence. One of them says you discharged a firearm at them." Dawes looked up. "That how you remember it?" "No." Ronan's voice was steady. "That's not how it happened." "Then tell me how it did happen." So they did. The whole story. From the beginning. The financial problems starting after the accident, the canceled contracts, the inflated supply costs, the cut fence and wagon tracks, the missing letters from the desk, the cattle staged on government land, ready to be planted on Ronan's property. And finally, Garrick pulling a gun when he realized he'd been caught. Dawes wrote it all down, his expression giving nothing away. When they finished, he sat back and tapped his pencil against the notebook. "That's quite an accusation." "It's the truth," Marlene said. "I have documentation. The ranch ledgers showing the financial irregularities. Notes about Garrick's involvement in every deal that went wrong." "Let me see them." She brought out both ledgers, the pages she'd marked, the timeline she'd constructed. Dawes went through it all methodically, taking his time. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rustle of paper and the scratch of his pencil. Finally, he closed the ledgers and looked at Ronan. "You believe he caused your accident too?" "I think so, but I can't prove it." "Can you prove any of the rest of this? The inflated costs, the sabotaged contracts?" "Some of it. The numbers are there. And if you contact the Denver buyer, James Holloway, I think he'll confirm that Garrick convinced him to cancel our deal." "And if he doesn't?" Ronan's jaw tightened. "Then it's my word against Garrick's. I know how that ends." Dawes studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Maybe. But here's what I do know. Garrick Mercer left town last night in a hurry. Didn't tell anyone where he was going or when he'd be back. Left his ranch hands without instructions. That's not the behavior of an innocent man." Marlene felt something loosen in her chest. "You believe us?" "I believe something happened that scared him enough to run. Whether it's everything you're claiming, I can't say yet. But I'll investigate." He stood, tucking away his notebook. "In the meantime, I need you both to stay available. Don't leave the area. And if Garrick comes back, you send word immediately. Don't confront him. Don't engage. Understood?" "Understood," Ronan said. After the sheriff left, they sat in the parlor staring at each other. The silence felt fragile, like they were both afraid to break it and find out what happened next. "He believed us," Marlene said finally. "Part of him did, but belief isn't proof." Ronan rubbed his face. "Garrick's smart. If he covered his tracks well enough, there might not be anything to find." "Then we keep looking." "Marlene," he said her name carefully, like he was testing its weight. "You've done enough. More than enough. If Garrick comes back, if this gets worse, I don't want you caught in the crossfire." "Little late for that." "I'm serious. You threw yourself at an armed man yesterday. You could have died. But I didn't." She met his eyes. And I'm not running. This is my fight too now. You made it that way when you married me. That was just a practical arrangement. You don't owe me each. Stop. Her voice was sharp. Stop trying to give me an out. I don't want one. This ranch, this fight, I'm in it. All the way. So either accept that or tell me to leave, but don't keep acting like I'm here by accident. Ronan stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Why? Why would you risk this for a place that isn't even yours? For someone you barely know? Because nobody stood up for me when Thomas's family took everything. Nobody questioned their paperwork or their claims. They just let it happen because I was alone and powerless, and it was easier not to care. She felt her throat tighten, but pushed through. I won't be that person. The one who stands by and watches injustice happen because it's safer. Not again. The silence that followed felt different, heavier, like something had been said that couldn't be taken back. All right, Ronan said quietly. Then we're in this together. Together. He held out his hand. She took it. The handshake felt formal and binding, more serious than their actual wedding had been. A promise made with full understanding of what it meant. Over the next 3 days, the story spread through Black Ridge exactly as Marlene had predicted. The basic facts got mangled and embroidered, but the core remained. Garrick Mercer had run. And in a place where reputation was everything, running was as good as a confession. People started treating Ronan differently. Men who'd avoided him since the accident now nodded when they passed him on the street. Shopkeepers who'd been polite but distant warmed up. It was like watching a community remember someone they'd forgotten. They feel guilty, Marlene said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. For writing you off. For believing you were finished. Maybe. Ronan didn't sound convinced. Or maybe they just love a scandal more than they love consistency. Probably both. He almost smiled at that. The reply from James Holloway arrived on the 4th day. Marlene brought it in from the mailbox, her hands shaking slightly as she handed it to Ronan. He read it twice, his expression carefully blank. Then he passed it to her without a word. The letter was brief, but damning. Holloway explained that Garrick had contacted him 6 weeks ago with concerns about the quality of Ronan's cattle, suggested they might be diseased, that Ronan wasn't managing his herd properly due to his injury, offered to supply cattle from his own ranch instead at a better price. Holloway had believed him. They'd done business before, and Garrick had always been reliable. He'd canceled Ronan's contract and made a new deal with Garrick. This is it, Marlene breathed. This is proof. Of one thing, one contract. But Ronan's voice held something like hope. It's not everything, but it's something. She took the letter to Sheriff Dawes that afternoon. He read it, made a copy, and added it to what he called his Mercer file. The investigation was ongoing, he said. Slow, but thorough. Found something else interesting, Dawes added. Talk to your former wife. Ronan's face went very still. Catherine? She's in Denver, runs a dress shop now. Dawes consulted his notes. Said she left because Garrick told her you were dying. Said the doctor had given you maybe 6 months, that the infection from your leg was spreading. Told her she should go make a life for herself before you deteriorated completely. The color drained from Ronan's face. What? She believed him. Said Garrick was very convincing, very concerned. Showed her what he claimed were medical reports. Dawes looked up. She said if she'd known you were going to recover, she never would have left. Marlene watched Ronan process this. Saw him work through the implications. Catherine hadn't abandoned him out of cruelty or shallow vanity. She'd been lied to, manipulated, driven away as part of Garrick's plan to isolate Ronan completely. That son of a... Ronan couldn't finish, just sat there with his hands clenched, trembling with rage or grief or both. There's more, Dawes continued. I contacted some of your other suppliers, the ones where costs suddenly increased. 3 of them confirmed Garrick approached them with similar stories. That you were unreliable, that your judgment was compromised, that they should charge higher rates to offset the risk of doing business with you. How many? Ronan's voice was barely audible. So far? 5, I can confirm. Probably more. Dawes closed his notebook. I've got enough now to bring charges. Fraud, at minimum. Maybe attempted theft. The question is whether I can find Garrick to serve him. And if you can't, then I issue a warrant and wait. He'll surface eventually. They always do. The sheriff stood. In the meantime, watch yourself. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Garrick's about as cornered as they come. After Dawes left, Ronan sat on the porch for a long time, staring at nothing. Marlene gave him space, working in the garden while keeping him in her peripheral vision. She could see him processing, working through years of beliefs that had just been shattered. When full dark had fallen and the temperature dropped, she finally went to him. Come inside. It's cold. She didn't leave because I was broken. His voice was hollow. All this time I thought, I believe she saw me as less than a man, as something damaged and worthless. But she thought I was dying. Marlene sat down beside him. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's... He trailed off, then started again. It's almost worse knowing, at least before I could hate her. Could tell myself she was shallow and selfish and I was better off. But now, he looked at Marlene. She was scared, and Garrick used that fear to drive her away, to make sure I'd be completely alone when everything else fell apart. You're not alone anymore. No? Something shifted in his expression. No, I'm not. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, watching the stars come out. After a while, Ronan spoke again. There's something I need to tell you about my leg. All right. It's not getting better. The doctor said it won't. Best case, I'll always need the cane. Worst case, the pain gets worse and eventually I lose the ability to walk entirely. He said it matter-of-factly, like reciting facts from a ledger. I wanted you to know, before this goes any further. Further? Whatever this is? Between us. He gestured vaguely. I don't want you thinking I'm going to suddenly recover and be whole again. This is it. This is what I am now. Marlene thought about that. About Thomas, who'd been healthy and strong right up until he wasn't. About how quickly life could strip away everything you counted on. About how the only thing that mattered was whether someone stood by you when things got hard. I've been thinking about your leg too, she said. He tensed. Yeah? Back in Cincinnati, I helped care for a woman whose son had been injured in a factory accident. His leg was crushed, similar to yours. The doctor said he'd never walk without crutches, but his mother had learned some techniques from a nurse, exercises, manipulations, ways of working the damaged muscles that helped strengthen what was left. She paused. It didn't fix him, but it helped, made the pain more manageable, gave him back some function. Ronan was very quiet. And you think that might work for me? I don't know, but I'd like to try. If you'll let me. That would mean you touching my leg, working on it. Yes. I don't like people seeing it, how bad it is. I know. She kept her voice gentle. But I'm not people. I'm your wife. And I've already seen you at your worst. Last night, when you could barely make it to bed. This morning, when the pain was so bad you couldn't hide it anymore. I'm not going to judge you for having limits. I'm just offering a way to maybe make those limits a little less restrictive. He was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then quietly, all right, we can try. They started that night. Ronan's bedroom, lamplight casting long shadows across the floor. He sat on the edge of the bed while she pulled up a chair. And when he finally rolled up his left trouser leg, she understood why he'd been so reluctant. The scarring was extensive. Long surgical incisions crisscrossed with the puckered marks of infection. The muscle had atrophied, leaving the leg noticeably thinner than his right. And the way it sat, the angle of it, she could see where the bones had healed wrong, creating misalignment that put stress on everything else. It's ugly, Ronan said flatly. You don't have to pretend otherwise. It's not ugly, it's hurt. She placed her hands carefully on his calf, feeling the tight, damaged tissue. There's a difference. She worked slowly, carefully, testing to see what he could tolerate. The exercises she remembered were simple, but precise. Gentle stretching. Careful manipulation. Pressure applied to specific points to ease the constant tension. Ronan bore it silently, jaw clenched, sweat breaking out on his forehead. Tell me if it's too much, she said. It's fine. Ronan, it hurts, but not worse than it already does, just different. They kept at it for 20 minutes before she called a stop. His leg was shaking with fatigue and his face had gone gray. She helped him straighten it out, pulled the trouser leg back down. We'll do this every evening, she said. It'll take time to see any improvement, weeks, maybe months, and it might not work at all. I know. He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she hadn't seen before. But thank you for trying. She left him to sleep and climbed the stairs to her own room. Her hands were tired from the work, and she could still feel the heat of his damaged leg against her palms. It was intimate in a way their marriage ceremony hadn't been. She'd touched the part of him he hated most, the evidence of his vulnerability, and he'd let her. That meant something. She wasn't sure what yet, but it meant something. They fell into a new routine, days spent working the ranch, evenings spent on the leg therapy. Slowly, grudgingly, Marlene started to see small changes. The muscle responded to the work, building a little strength. The range of motion improved slightly. Ronan's pain levels dropped from constant agony to merely persistent aching. It wasn't a miracle. He still needed the cane, still had bad days where walking was an ordeal, but the good days became slightly more frequent, and the bad days became slightly less terrible. "It's working," he said one night, surprise in his voice. "I can actually feel it working." "Don't push too hard. Improvement this slow is easy to lose if you overdo it." "I won't." But she could see the hope in his face, cautious and fragile, but there nonetheless. 2 weeks after Garrick's flight, Marlene was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation at the general store. Two women talking in low voices, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Saw him 2 nights ago, out by the old Miller place." "You're sure it was Garrick Mercer?" "Positive. He was meeting with someone. Couldn't see who, but they were arguing about something." Marlene kept her face neutral, pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. The women moved on, but their words stuck with her. Garrick was back, or had never really left. He was hiding somewhere close, and he was still planning something. She told Ronan as soon as she got home. His expression went hard. "We need to tell Dawes." "And say what? That I overheard gossip?" She set down the supplies. "We don't even know if it's true. If it is true, he's dangerous. You said it yourself. Cornered animals are dangerous." "So what do we do?" Ronan thought for a moment. "We stay alert, keep watch, and we prepare for the possibility that he's not done yet." That night, Ronan loaded his rifle and set it by the front door. They checked all the locks, made sure the windows were secure. It felt like preparing for a siege, and maybe they were. Marlene lay in bed listening to the house creak and settle, every sound suddenly suspicious. Somewhere outside a coyote howled, and she flinched. This was the price of standing up, she thought, the constant looking over your shoulder, the fear that victory wasn't final, but still better than surrender. 3 days later, she was hanging laundry when she saw smoke rising from the eastern pasture. Too much smoke for a campfire. Too dark for burning brush. The barn. She dropped the laundry basket and ran for the house. "Ronan, fire!" He came out at a limping run, saw the smoke, cursed. They both headed for the eastern section as fast as they could move, but Marlene knew they'd be too late. By the time they reached it, the old equipment shed was fully engulfed, flames licking 50 feet into the air. They couldn't save it. All they could do was make sure the fire didn't spread to the dry grass around it. They dug fire breaks with desperate speed, beating out embers that landed nearby, working until they were both black with soot and exhausted. By the time the structure collapsed into coals, the sun was setting. They stood watching it burn down, too tired to move. "He did this," Ronan said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Garrick did this. You don't know that." "Yes, I do, and so do you." He turned to look at her. "This is a message. He's saying he can hurt us whenever he wants, that running doesn't mean defeated." Marlene wanted to argue, but she couldn't. The fire had been set deliberately. She'd seen the pattern of it, the way it had started in multiple places at once. Someone had used accelerant and planned it carefully. When Sheriff Dawes arrived the next morning to investigate, he confirmed what they already knew. Arson. Professional work. No evidence left behind to point to anyone specific. "But we all know who did it," Ronan said. Dawes nodded grimly. "I've got deputies watching the roads. If Garrick's in the area, we'll find him. In the meantime, I'm posting a man here at night. Someone's watching your place, and I won't have them hurt you while I'm chasing shadows." It was a small comfort. The deputy, a young man named Carson, took up position in the barn with a rifle and instructions to shoot first if anyone came around after dark. Marlene found it both reassuring and terrifying. They'd gone from fighting in courts and ledgers to needing armed guards. This is escalating, she said to Ronan that night as they went through the leg therapy. Her hands worked automatically now, knowing which points to press and which to avoid. He's getting desperate. I know. Ronan winced as she worked a particularly tight muscle. Question is, how desperate? What's his endgame? Probably trying to force you to sell, make life so difficult you give up. Then he doesn't know me very well. Ronan's voice was hard. I've lost too much already. My leg, my wife, my reputation, nearly my ranch. I'm not giving him one more thing, not one. She believed him. She could hear the steel in his voice, the absolute refusal to bend. It was admirable and also concerning. Men who wouldn't bend sometimes broke instead. We need a plan, she said. Not just defense, offense, a way to end this permanently. I'm open to suggestions. She thought about it while she worked. The problem with Garrick was that he operated in shadows, cutting fences, setting fires, spreading lies, all things that were hard to prove. They needed to draw him into the open, make him commit to something that couldn't be denied. What if we gave him what he wants? She said slowly. Ronan looked at her sharply. What? Not really, but make him think we are. Let word spread that you're considering selling, that the fire was the last straw, that you're meeting with buyers to discuss terms. And then? And then we see if he shows up. If he does, we'll have witnesses, proof he's still in the area. Maybe proof of more if we're clever about it. Ronan considered this. It's risky. If it goes wrong, it's all risky, but doing nothing while he picks us apart is risker. She met his eyes. We need to end this. One way or another. He nodded slowly. All right, let's set a trap. Over the next 2 days, they carefully spread the rumor. Ronan mentioned to the blacksmith that he was tired of fighting. Marlene told Clara at the general store that they were considering their options. The story rippled outward like stones in a pond. And then they waited. The message came on the third day. A note slipped under the door while they were both out working, written in handwriting Marlene didn't recognize. Want to discuss sale. Old Miller Place. Midnight tomorrow. Come alone. They showed it to Sheriff Dawes. He read it twice, then looked at Ronan. It's a trap. I know. So we make it our trap instead of his. Dawes pulled out a map. Miller Place is abandoned. Good sight lines. Easy to cover. I'll have men positioned before you arrive. Soon as Garrick shows himself, we take him. And if it's not Garrick, if he sends someone else, then we ask that someone questions until they tell us where to find him. Dawes's expression was grim. This ends tomorrow night. One way or another. Marlene insisted on going with Ronan. Dawes argued, but she stood firm. Garrick would expect Ronan to bring his wife. They'd been inseparable since the confrontation at the northern boundary. Her absence would signal a trap. So the next night, just before midnight, they rode toward the abandoned Miller Place with Deputy Carson following at a distance. 3 more deputies were already positioned around the property, hidden in the darkness. The old house loomed against the stars, windows like empty eyes. Ronan and Marlene dismounted carefully, moving toward the front door. The silence was absolute, oppressive. Then a voice from the darkness. Ronan! Garrick stepped out from behind the house, but he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, both armed, and from the cold way he was smiling, Marlene knew instantly that he'd anticipated their plan. You really think I wouldn't expect the sheriff? Garrick's voice was mocking. I've been watching. I know Dawes has men out here, which is why I brought insurance. He nodded to his men. One of them produced a torch and lit it. In the sudden flare of light, Marlene saw what they'd missed, rags stuffed into the broken windows of the house. The sharp smell of kerosene heavy in the air. Here's how this works, Garrick said. You sign over the ranch to me right now, or this place goes up with your deputies inside. And before you say they're not in there, I watch them position themselves. All 4 of them, hiding in that house like rats in a trap. Ronan's face had gone white. You'd kill lawmen? I'd kill anyone who stands between me and what should have been mine from the start. Garrick's expression was cold, completely sane, and utterly merciless. That ranch was supposed to be mine. My father promised it. But then you came along with your perfect reputation and your way with cattle, and suddenly I was second choice, second place. Not good enough. So you tried to kill me. I tried to break you. The accident was supposed to leave you weak enough that you'd give up. But you're more stubborn than I expected. So I had to get creative. He pulled out papers. Sign these, transfer the deed, or watch this place burn with 4 men inside. Marlene's mind raced. The deputies were in the house, trapped. If Garrick's men lit it, they'd burn alive. But if Ronan signed, Garrick would have what he wanted, and there'd be nothing to stop him from killing them all anyway. No good options, no clean way out. How do we know you'll let them go? Ronan asked, buying time. You don't, but you know for certain what happens if you refuse. Garrick held out the papers. Clock's ticking, cousin. Make your choice. And that's when Marlene saw it. A shadow moving along the side of the house. Someone Garrick's men hadn't accounted for. Deputy Carson, who'd been following them at a distance. She needed to buy him time to get into position. Wait, she said. Before he signs, I want something in writing. Proof you'll let the deputies go. Garrick laughed. You want proof? From me? You want this to look legal, don't you? Like a legitimate sale? Then give us assurances. She kept talking, watching Carson creep closer. Written agreement that the deputies go free. That we go free. Make it look like a real transaction instead of theft. Fine. Garrick pulled out more paper, started writing. But I'm not patient, so this better... The gunshot cracked through the night. Garrick's torch-bearing man dropped with a scream. Carson fired again, and the second man dove for cover. Ronan threw himself at Garrick, tackling him to the ground. Then everything dissolved into chaos. Shouts from the house as the deputies realized what was happening and came pouring out. Garrick fighting like a wild animal, all pretense of civility gone. One of his men trying to get to the house with the torch, Carson bringing him down with a rifle butt to the head. Marlene grabbed the papers Garrick had dropped, both the deed transfer and his written agreement. Evidence, proof of intent. When the dust settled, Garrick was on his knees with Dawes's pistol against his head, and blood running down his face from where Ronan had hit him. His men were restrained, and the kerosene-soaked house stood unlit against the night sky. It's over, Dawes said quietly. Garrick Mercer, I'm arresting you for attempted murder, arson, fraud, and about 6 other charges I'll think up on the ride back to town. Garrick looked up at Ronan. There was hatred in his eyes, and desperation, and something that might have been grief for everything he'd lost, chasing something that was never going to be his. You always took everything, he said bitterly. Everyone always chose you. No, Ronan said. I worked for what I got. You just wanted it handed to you. That's the difference. They took Garrick away in chains. His men went with him, and suddenly the Miller place was quiet again. Just Marlene and Ronan and Deputy Carson standing in the darkness. You all right? Carson asked. Yeah. Ronan was shaking slightly, adrenaline fading. We're all right. They rode back to the ranch in silence. The eastern sky was starting to lighten by the time they arrived. Marlene helped Ronan inside, and this time when his leg gave out from exhaustion and stress, she caught him without comment and got him to a chair. He sat there breathing hard, looking at nothing, processing. She made coffee, and they drank it without speaking. Finally, Ronan said, It's really over. It's really over. I don't know what to do with that. He looked at her. I've been fighting for so long, first to survive the injury, then to save the ranch. I don't remember what it's like to not be fighting. We'll figure it out. She took his hand. Together. He looked down at their joined hands. Together, yeah. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The beginning of a new day and maybe, finally, a new chapter. One where they weren't just surviving, but actually living. Where they weren't just partners in necessity, but something more. Something neither of them had planned for, but both of them, quietly and carefully, were starting to want. The trial was set for 3 weeks after Garrick's arrest. 3 weeks that felt both too long and not long enough. Black Ridge buzzed with speculation, and everywhere Marlene went, she felt eyes following her. Some looks were sympathetic, others calculating, a few outright hostile. Town's divided, Clara told her one afternoon at the general store. Half think Garrick got what he deserved. Other half think you and Ronan are making trouble where there wasn't any. There was plenty of trouble. We just brought it into the light. I know that, you know that. Clara lowered her voice. But Garrick's got friends. People who owe him favors or did business with him. They're not happy about this. Marlene understood what Clara wasn't saying directly, that the trial wouldn't just be about Garrick's crimes. It would be about whether Black Ridge believed a crippled rancher and his strange new wife over a respected businessman who'd been part of the community for decades. She told Ronan that evening while working on his leg. His muscles were noticeably stronger now, the range of motion improved enough that he could stand for longer periods without the pain becoming unbearable. But progress was slow, and some days he still woke up barely able to move. "Let them think what they want," he said, jaw tight as she worked a particularly stubborn knot. "We've got evidence. We've got witnesses. That's what matters. Evidence can be explained away. Witnesses can be discredited." She pressed her thumb into the muscle, feeling it resist, then slowly release. "We need to be ready for that." "I am ready." But his voice carried doubt underneath the determination. The problem was that Garrick's lawyer was good. Matthew Crane had come in from Denver, sharp-dressed and sharp-tongued, with a reputation for defending the indefensible and winning. He'd already started laying groundwork, spreading counter-narrative through carefully placed conversations. That Ronan was bitter and delusional from his injury. That Marlene was a gold digger who'd manipulated a vulnerable man. That the so-called evidence was circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst. "He's making us the villains," Marlene said. "Of course he is. That's his job." Ronan flexed his leg experimentally. "But we know the truth. That has to count for something." She wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that truth and justice were the same thing. But she'd watched Thomas's family lie under oath about debts and contracts, watched judges believe them because they wore nice clothes and spoke with confidence. Truth mattered less than presentation, and Garrick's lawyer understood that better than anyone. 2 days before the trial, a man Marlene didn't recognize showed up at the ranch. He was thin and nervous, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. He stood by the fence, twisting his hat in his hands, until Ronan came out to meet him. "Help you with something?" "Maybe?" The man glanced around like he was worried about being seen. "Name's Porter. I worked for Garrick Mercer on his ranch." Ronan's expression went cold. "Not sure we have anything to talk about." "Please, just hear me out." Porter's voice cracked. "I know things about what he did, what he made us do." That got Ronan's attention. He gestured Porter toward the house. "Come on inside." They sat in the kitchen, and Porter told his story haltingly, stopping and starting, clearly terrified of the consequences. He'd been working for Garrick for 5 years. Good job, decent pay, no complaints. Then about 2 years ago, things changed. "He started asking us to do things," Porter said. "Small things at first. Cut a fence here, move some cattle there. He said it was just ranch business, nothing illegal. But then it got worse. He had us sabotage Ronan's equipment, mix bad feed in with the good, little things that would cause problems but couldn't be traced back to anyone." "Why?" Marlene asked. "Why would you do that?" Porter looked ashamed. "He paid extra, and he made it clear that if we refused, we'd lose our jobs. Out here, jobs aren't easy to come by. I got a wife, 3 kids. I couldn't afford to say no." "What about the accident?" Ronan's voice was tight. "My accident. Were you there?" "No, but I heard Garrick talking about it after. Bragging, almost. Said he'd spooked your horse with a firecracker, that you'd gone down hard, that it worked even better than he'd planned." Porter's hands shook. "He laughed about it, about you being crippled. Said it served you right for being born with everything he should have had." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Marlene watched Ronan's face, saw him absorb this confirmation of what he'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe, that his cousin had deliberately, calculatingly destroyed his life. "Will you testify?" Ronan asked finally. "In court. Will you tell them what you just told us?" Porter hesitated. "If I do, I'm finished in this county. Nobody will hire me. Garrick's got too many connections. If you don't, he might go free." "And then what? You think he'll forget you knew about his crimes? You think you'll be safe?" That hit home. Porter paled. "I didn't think about it that way." "Start thinking about it." Ronan leaned forward. "He's dangerous. We caught him trying to burn down a building with 4 men inside. You really want someone like that walking free? Someone who knows you could connect him to multiple crimes?" Porter swallowed hard. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, I'll testify, but you gotta promise me something." What? After this is over, if I need work, if nobody else will hire me, you'll give me a job. My family can't survive without income. Ronan glanced at Marlene. She gave a small nod. They needed Porter's testimony, and the man was taking a genuine risk. Deal, Ronan said. You testify truthfully, and there's a place for you here if you need it. Porter's relief was visible. They spent the next hour going over his story, making sure he could articulate it clearly. When he left, riding away quickly, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve, Marlene and Ronan sat looking at each other. That changes everything, she said. If he doesn't back out, if Crane doesn't tear him apart on the stand. But there was hope in Ronan's voice now. Real hope. The morning of the trial, they dressed carefully. Ronan wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed. Marlene wore a dark blue dress Clara had helped her alter, simple but respectable. They looked like what they were, hard-working people who'd been pushed too far and were fighting back. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back, more crowded outside the doors trying to hear. This was the biggest thing to happen in Black Ridge in years, maybe decades. A prominent citizen accused of attempted murder and conspiracy. The whole county had turned out to watch. Garrick sat at the defendant's table looking calm and composed, his lawyer beside him. He'd cleaned up well for the trial, shaved, hair combed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ronan made in a month. He looked respectable, trustworthy, nothing like the desperate man who'd threatened to burn deputies alive. Judge Morrison entered and everyone rose. He was an older man, stern-faced, with a reputation for fairness that Marlene hoped was earned. They needed him to be fair, needed him to see through the expensive suit and polished lies to the truth underneath. The prosecutor was a territorial attorney named Walsh. Competent but not flashy, he laid out the charges methodically. Attempted murder, arson, fraud, conspiracy. The litany went on, each charge more serious than the last. Then Crane stood for the defense. He was everything Walsh wasn't, charismatic, commanding, the kind of speaker who could make you doubt your own memories. He painted a picture of Garrick as a concerned family member trying to help a struggling cousin, a successful businessman whose generosity had been twisted into something sinister by people who didn't understand frontier commerce. The prosecution would have you believe that my client spent years orchestrating an elaborate scheme, Crane said, his voice rich with disbelief. But the simpler explanation is far more likely, that Mr. Ronan Mercer, struggling with the aftermath of a tragic accident, began to see conspiracies where none existed, that his new wife, eager to secure her position, encouraged these delusions, that together they constructed an elaborate fantasy to explain away simple bad luck and poor business decisions. It was effective. Marlene saw doubt creeping into faces around the courtroom, saw people who'd been sympathetic start to question. Crane was good at his job, and he was doing it well. The first witnesses were the deputies who'd been at the Miller place. They testified about Garrick's threats, the kerosene, the attempted arson. But under cross-examination, Crane picked at their stories. Wasn't it dark? Could they really be certain of what they'd heard? Might they have misunderstood the situation? Perhaps Mr. Mercer was simply trying to negotiate, Crane suggested smoothly. Perhaps the presence of armed men made him feel threatened, and he was simply protecting himself. By threatening to burn us alive? Deputy Carson's voice was sharp. By trying to create leverage in a situation where he felt endangered. Crane turned to the jury. Gentlemen, we weren't there. We don't know what fear and darkness might have made these good men perceive incorrectly. Marlene felt her stomach sink. He was doing it, taking clear testimony and muddying it with suggestions and alternative explanations, making everything questionable. Sheriff Dawes testified next about the investigation. The ledgers, the correspondence with Holloway, the pattern of financial sabotage. But Crane had answers for all of it. The ledgers showed poor management, not conspiracy. The Holloway letter proved only that Garrick had voiced legitimate concerns about his cousin's cattle. The pattern could be explained by Ronan's inability to effectively run his ranch after his injury. Isn't it true, Crane asked, that Mr. Mercer's ranch has been failing for 18 months? That contracts have fallen through, suppliers have raised prices, buyers have walked away? And isn't the simplest explanation that a man who can barely walk cannot effectively manage a cattle operation? That's not, Dawes started. Yes or no, Sheriff? Has the ranch been failing? Yes, but thank you. No further questions. When they broke for lunch, Ronan was pale. He's winning. Not yet. But Marlene wasn't sure she believed it. The afternoon session started with James Holloway testifying by written deposition. He confirmed that Garrick had contacted him with concerns about Ronan's cattle, but under questioning from Crane, admitted he'd never actually inspected the animals himself. He'd simply trusted Garrick's assessment based on their prior business relationship. "So you don't have direct knowledge of any deficiency in Mr. Ronan Mercer's cattle?" Crane asked. "No, but thank you. That's all." Then it was time for Porter. He walked to the stand looking like a man heading for his own execution. His hands trembled as he was sworn in, and his voice shook when Walsh asked him to state his name. But as he started telling his story, something changed. He stopped looking at Crane's intimidating presence and started looking at the jury, started talking to them like people, not legal abstractions, told them about the orders Garrick had given, the sabotage he'd been forced to participate in, the way Garrick had laughed about Ronan's injury. The courtroom was dead silent. This wasn't abstract financial records or disputed interpretations. This was a man confessing his own crimes and implicating his former employer. Crane stood for cross-examination, and Marlene held her breath. "Mr. Porter, you've admitted to multiple criminal acts, trespassing, vandalism, conspiracy. Do you expect this court to believe you're suddenly seized by conscience?" "I expect the court to believe I'm scared." Porter's voice was steady now. "Scared of what Mr. Mercer might do if he goes free. Scared of what he'll do to me and my family for testifying. Or perhaps you're simply trying to avoid prosecution yourself by making a deal with the prosecutor's office." "No deal. I'm here because it's right, because I got kids and I can't look them in the eye if I stay quiet about this." Crane tried several more angles, but Porter held firm. He didn't waver, didn't change his story, just kept repeating the truth in his own words. And slowly, Marlene saw the jury start to believe him. When Walsh called Marlene to the stand, she felt her heart hammering. This was it. Her chance to make the jury understand. She testified about finding the ledgers, recognizing the patterns, piecing together Garrick's scheme, about the cut fence and wagon tracks, about Garrick's visits and his barely veiled threats, about the fire that destroyed the equipment shed. Crane's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her motives, her timing, her convenient marriage to a wealthy landowner. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Mercer, that you arrived in Black Ridge penniless and desperate? That you married Mr. Mercer for security?" "Yes." That seemed to surprise him. He'd expected denial. "So you admit you had financial motivation?" "I admit I needed shelter and food, same as anyone else. But that doesn't make me a liar." She looked directly at the jury. "I married Ronan Mercer because I needed security. I'm testifying because I saw crimes being committed and I won't stay silent about it. Those are two different things." "Are they? Or is this elaborate accusation simply your way of securing your position, of making yourself indispensable?" "If I wanted to secure my position, I'd have kept quiet and hoped nobody noticed the ranch was being sabotaged. Bringing all this to light made my life harder, not easier. Half the town thinks I'm a troublemaker now. But I'd rather be a troublemaker telling the truth than comfortable staying silent." She saw a few jury members nod slightly. Not all of them, but some. It was something. Ronan testified last. He walked to the stand without the cane, a deliberate choice, though Marlene saw the strain it cost him. He wanted the jury to see him as capable, not broken. Walsh asked him to describe the accident. Ronan spoke carefully, precisely, about the ride with Garrick. The sudden sound like a firecracker, the horse bolting, the fall and the impact and waking up in agony with his cousin's concerned face above him. "At the time, did you suspect anything unusual?" "No. I trusted him. He was family." Ronan's voice was flat, emotionless. "It wasn't until months later when I noticed the pattern of problems that I started questioning what had really happened." "And what did you conclude?" "That he'd been destroying my ranch systematically, and that the accident that crippled me wasn't an accident at all." Crane's cross-examination was vicious. He questioned Ronan's memory, his judgment, his mental state. "Isn't it true that you suffer from chronic pain, that you take laudanum regularly?" "When the pain is bad, yes. And laudanum can cause confusion, can't it? Paranoia? Delusions?" "I'm not delusional." "You're accusing your own cousin of trying to murder you based on a sound you think you heard 18 months ago, from a man who saved your life by getting you to a doctor. Does that sound rational? Ronan's jaw tightened. He saved my life after he tried to take it. That doesn't make him innocent. That makes him calculating. Or perhaps you're simply unable to accept that your accident was just bad luck, that your ranch is failing because you can no longer manage it effectively, that sometimes tragedy has no villain, just circumstances. My ranch was failing because Garrick made it fail. And if I can't prove the accident beyond doubt, I can prove everything that came after. The sabotage, the lies, the manipulation. That's not paranoia, that's documentation. They went back and forth, Crane pressing and Ronan holding firm. By the end, both men looked exhausted. The judge called a recess, and Marlene helped Ronan back to his seat. His leg was trembling from the strain of standing so long. "You did well," she whispered. "Did I? Because I can't tell anymore." He looked at the jury, trying to read their faces. "Can you tell what they're thinking?" She couldn't. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical. Most just looked tired. Closing arguments came the next morning. Crane went first, weaving together his alternative narrative with practiced skill. A family tragedy, not a crime. A cousin trying to help, not destroy. A crippled man unable to accept his limitations, creating elaborate conspiracies rather than face hard truths. Gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to consider what's more likely. That a respected businessman spent years orchestrating an incredibly complex scheme for minimal gain? Or that a man struggling with injury and loss began to see malice where none existed? We all want our suffering to mean something. To have a villain we can blame. But sometimes life is just hard, and blaming others doesn't change that. It was good, disturbingly good. Marlene saw several jury members nodding. Then Walsh stood. He was quieter than Crane, less theatrical, but his words carried weight. He walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, not the dramatic conspiracy Crane had mocked, but simple facts. Money disappearing, contracts canceled, witnesses testifying to orders given and crimes committed. And finally, Garrick threatening to murder 4 men rather than face justice. Mr. Crane asks you what's more likely. I'll tell you what's likely. That a man who wanted his cousin's land found an opportunity when that cousin was injured. That he exploited that opportunity methodically and without mercy. That when he was discovered, he escalated to violence. That's not conspiracy theory. That's documentation and testimony from multiple sources. The only question before you is whether you'll let wealth and respectability blind you to clear evidence of crime. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Marlene and Ronan waited in a small room off the courthouse, not speaking, just existing in the tense space of not knowing. Clara brought them coffee that went cold, untouched. Sheriff Dawes stopped by to tell them it was a good sign they were taking so long. Meant they were considering carefully. Marlene wasn't sure if that was better or worse. When the bailiff finally called them back, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Everyone wanted to see how this ended. Garrick sat straight and composed at his table, but Marlene saw his hands clenched white-knuckled on the arms of his chair. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman stood, unfolding a piece of paper. The silence was so complete Marlene could hear her own heartbeat. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, people talking over each other. Judge Morrison banged his gavel hard. Order! I'll have order! The foreman continued through the remaining charges. Guilty of arson, guilty of fraud, guilty of conspiracy. Guilty on every count except one charge of theft that couldn't be proven beyond reasonable doubt. Garrick's face had gone from composed to ashen. He was staring at the jury like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, like he genuinely expected his money and status to protect him. Judge Morrison set sentencing for 2 weeks out, though he indicated the attempted murder charge alone carried a minimum of 10 years. Combined with the other charges, Garrick would likely spend the rest of his life in prison. As the deputies led him away in chains, he looked directly at Ronan. The hatred in his eyes was pure and absolute, but underneath it was something else. Disbelief. He'd truly thought he'd win, thought he was smarter, better, more deserving, and he couldn't comprehend how it had gone wrong. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around them, some offering congratulations, others awkward apologies for doubting, a few still skeptical, muttering about technicalities and fancy lawyers. But the majority seemed genuinely relieved that justice had been done. You did it, Clara said, hugging Marlene tight. You actually did it. We did it. Marlene looked at Ronan, who was leaning heavily on his cane now, exhausted but vindicated. Both of us. They rode home as sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Neither spoke much. There was too much to process, too much emotion to fit into words. Victory and relief and exhaustion all tangled together. When they reached the ranch, Ronan stopped the wagon and just sat looking at it. His land, his home, finally secure. No longer under threat. No longer slowly dying. I almost lost this place, he said quietly. Almost lost everything. But you didn't, because of you. He turned to face her. You could have walked away, should have walked away. This wasn't your fight. It was the moment I married you that made it mine. That was just a practical arrangement. Maybe at first, she met his eyes. But somewhere along the way it became more than that, at least for me. The silence that followed felt enormous. Ronan stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. For me too, he said finally. I didn't want it to, didn't plan for it. But working together, fighting together, you taking care of my leg every night like it mattered, like I mattered. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I started caring what you thought, started wanting to hear your voice, started looking forward to evening because it meant time with you. Marlene felt her throat tighten. I thought I was alone. After Thomas died, after his family took everything, I thought I'd be alone forever. But you, us, this became something I wanted to fight for. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because I wanted this life. With you. Even with the leg, the pain, the limitations? Especially with those things, because they're part of you, and I... She paused, realizing what she was about to say. But it was true, so she said it anyway. I love you. Not despite the broken parts. Just all of you. Ronan's eyes went wide. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Marlene, His voice cracked. I don't know how to do this. The love part, I thought I did once with Catherine, but I was wrong about that. I don't want to be wrong about this. Then don't be. Just be honest. That's all I need. He reached for her hand, held it tight. I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was too stubborn to admit it, too scared of being vulnerable again. But you kept showing up, kept fighting for me when I'd given up on myself. And somewhere in all of that, you became the most important thing in my life. She kissed him. Not the cold, obligatory kiss from their wedding, but something real and deep and full of promise. He pulled her closer, one hand tangled in her hair, the other gripping her waist like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ronan was smiling. Actually smiling, open and genuine in a way she'd never seen from him. Come on, he said. Let's go home. They climbed down from the wagon and walked toward the house together, his arm around her shoulders, hers around his waist, supporting each other the way they'd learned to do, the way they'd keep doing for whatever came next, because there would be more challenges. The ranch still needed work. The town would still gossip. Ronan's leg would always be damaged, but they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. The door opened to lamplight and warmth. Their home, earned and fought for, and finally, truly theirs. The weeks after the trial brought a different kind of exhaustion. Not the desperate, clawing fight for survival, but the slow, steady work of rebuilding, of taking something that had been damaged and making it whole again. Ronan threw himself into the ranch with renewed energy. His leg was stronger now, not healed, would never be fully healed, but functional in ways it hadn't been since the accident. He could stand longer, walk farther, work without the constant agony that had defined his days. The exercises Marlene put him through each evening continued, and slowly, incrementally, he reclaimed pieces of himself he'd thought were lost forever. But there were still bad days, mornings when the pain was so intense he couldn't get out of bed without help. Afternoons when his leg gave out completely and he had to stop work early, frustrated and angry at his own limitations. Times when the old darkness crept back in, whispering that he was still broken, still less than what he'd been. On those days, Marlene didn't offer empty reassurances. She just stayed close, helped when he'd let her, and reminded him that strength wasn't the absence of weakness, it was showing up anyway. I hate this, he said one morning, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. The leg had locked up during the night, muscles seized into useless rigidity. I hate being like this. I know. She knelt in front of him, beginning the careful work of loosening the muscles. But you're still here. Still fighting. That counts for something. Does it? Because some days it feels like I'm just pretending to be the man I used to be. You're not that man anymore. You're someone different now. Someone who survived betrayal and injury and kept going. That's not pretending. That's becoming. He looked at her, eyes red with pain and sleeplessness. You really believe that? I really do. She pressed carefully against the locked muscle, feeling it resist. The man you were before might have been stronger physically, but he never had to fight for anything, never had to prove what he was made of. You've done that. Every single day since the accident, you've proven it. What have I proven? That I can limp through chores. That I need my wife to massage my leg every night just so I can walk the next morning. That you don't quit. That's what you've proven. She looked up at him. And needing help isn't weakness, Ronan. It's just being human. We all need help sometimes. You helped me when I had nothing. Let me help you now. Something in his face softened. He reached down, touched her cheek gently. How'd I get so lucky? Finding you? Luck had nothing to do with it. We found each other because we were both desperate and out of options. She smiled slightly. But what we made out of that desperation, that's not luck. That's choice. Every day we choose this. Choose each other. Yeah. He flexed the leg experimentally, still painful but loosening. Yeah, we do. Porter showed up the following week looking for the job Ronan had promised. He was nervous, clearly expecting to be turned away now that his testimony was no longer needed. But Ronan shook his hand firmly and put him to work repairing fences. You did right by me, Ronan said. Only fair I do right by you. Porter proved to be a solid worker, reliable, skilled, grateful for the second chance. Within a month, he'd brought his family out from town, and suddenly the ranch felt less isolated. Porter's wife Mary helped Marlene with the heavier household work, and their 3 kids brought noise and life to a place that had been too quiet for too long. It's strange, Marlene said one evening, watching the Porter children chase each other around the yard. A few months ago, this place felt like a tomb. Now it feels alive. That's your doing. Ronan was sitting on the porch, his legs stretched out, more relaxed than she'd seen him in weeks. You brought life back here. Brought me back. We brought each other back. She sat beside him. Neither of us could have done this alone. No. He took her hand. No, we couldn't have. The ranch began to recover. New contracts were negotiated, legitimate ones this time, with buyers Ronan vetted personally. The cattle fattened on good feed purchased at fair prices. Fences got repaired. Buildings got fixed. The slow decay Garrick had engineered started to reverse. Money was still tight. Would be for a while. Years of sabotage couldn't be undone in a season, but they were moving forward instead of sliding backward, and that made all the difference. Black Ridge's attitude shifted too. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. The people who doubted started offering awkward apologies. The ones who'd believed from the start felt vindicated, and everyone, regardless of their previous position, had to acknowledge what Marlene and Ronan had accomplished together. They're calling you the woman who saved Mercer Ranch, Clara told Marlene one afternoon at the store. That's not accurate. Ronan saved it. I just helped him see what was happening. Well, however it happened, people respect it. Respect you both. Clara lowered her voice. There's talk of asking Ronan to run for the town council. They want someone with integrity, someone who'll stand up to corruption. Marlene wasn't sure how she felt about that. The idea of Ronan in politics seemed strange. But then again, 6 months ago, the idea of her as a ranch wife had seemed impossible, and here she was. What does he think about it? Don't know. They haven't asked him yet. But I figured you should know it's coming. When Marlene mentioned it to Ronan that evening, he laughed outright. Town council? Me? Why not? You've got experience fighting corrupt businessmen. Might come in handy. I've got experience getting lied to and nearly losing everything, you mean. But he was considering it, she could tell. I don't know. Politics seems like a whole different kind of fight. It is. But that doesn't mean you wouldn't be good at it. She worked a knot in his calf muscle. Question is whether you want to. Whether it's worth your time and energy. What do you think? I think you care about this community more than you admit. I think watching Garrick exploit people made you angry, and you'd like to make sure it doesn't happen again. She paused. But I also think you've got enough on your plate rebuilding this ranch. So maybe the answer is not yet instead of never. Not yet. He tested the phrase. I like that. Leaves the door open without committing to walking through it. Exactly. 3 months after the trial, a letter arrived from Catherine. Ronan stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, his face unreadable. Marlene gave him space, working in the kitchen while he sat in the parlor reading. When he finally came to find her, he looked drained. She wants to meet, to talk. She's in Denver, says she could take the stage out here next week if I'm willing. He held out the letter. Says she needs to apologize in person. Marlene read it carefully. The writing was elegant, the words sincere sounding. Catherine explained that she'd only recently learned the full truth about Garrick's lies, that she'd believed she was protecting herself from watching Ronan die slowly, that if she'd known he would recover, she never would have left. Do you want to see her? Marlene asked carefully. I don't know. Ronan sat down heavily. Part of me wants closure, wants to hear her say she was wrong, that she should have stayed, that she should have trusted me instead of Garrick. He paused. But another part of me doesn't care anymore. That part of my life is over. I've moved on. Those aren't mutually exclusive. You can have moved on and still want closure. Would it bother you if I met with her? Marlene thought about it honestly. A little. Not because I don't trust you, but because she was your wife first. She has history with you that I don't. That's always going to be there. She met his eyes. But I also know you're not that man anymore. The man who married Catherine. You're different now. And the life you're building it with me. So no, it wouldn't bother me enough to ask you not to go. If you need this, then do it. Ronan pulled her close, pressed his forehead to hers. What did I do to deserve you? You showed up broken and honest. That's all I needed. He decided to meet Catherine in town, neutral territory, with Marlene waiting at the general store. He didn't want to bring his past to the ranch, didn't want Catherine's presence in the home he was building with Marlene. That distinction mattered to both of them. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Ronan came to find Marlene afterward, he looked exhausted but settled, like something had finally been put to rest. How was it? Necessary. He took her arm as they walked to the wagon. She apologized, explained what Garrick told her, how convincing he was. She really believed I was dying, that leaving was the kind thing to do, sparing herself the pain of watching, sparing me the burden of her grief. Do you believe her? Yeah, I do. He helped her up into the wagon, then climbed up himself. She's not a bad person, just someone who got scared and believed the wrong person. I can't hate her for that. But that life is over. What we had, it was real at the time, but it wasn't strong enough to survive crisis. It broke the first time things got hard. He looked at Marlene. What we have is different. It was forged in crisis, built on the hardest parts instead of the easy ones. That makes it stronger. You think so? I know so. He took her hand. Catherine and I loved each other when everything was good. You and I loved each other when everything was terrible. That's the difference. They rode home in comfortable silence, and Marlene thought about what he'd said. About how some relationships were built on sunshine and crumbled in rain, while others were built on storms and could weather anything. She and Ronan had started with nothing but necessity and desperation, had built something real from the wreckage of their separate lives. That foundation wouldn't crack easily. Summer moved into fall, and the ranch transformed. The cattle were sold at good prices to honest buyers. The money went toward repairs and supplies and paying Porter a fair wage. There wasn't much left over, but there was enough. Enough to survive, enough to keep building, enough to plan for next season. Marlene started keeping bees. It was something she'd always wanted to try, and the ranch had wildflowers in the high pastures that would make good honey. Ronan helped her build the hives, working slowly but steadily, and by late September they had 3 colonies established. Another income source, she said, checking the frames. Small, but every bit helps. You're good at this. The planning, the diversifying, the seeing opportunities where I just see work. He was leaning on his cane, watching her with undisguised admiration. You should handle all the business decisions. You're better at it than I ever was. We should handle them together. Your experience with cattle, my head for numbers. That's the strongest approach. Partners then, in everything. In everything. They rebuilt the equipment shed that Garrick had burned, making it larger and more functional than before. Porter's oldest son, 16 and eager, helped with the construction. The kid was good with his hands, quick to learn, and Ronan started teaching him about cattle management and ranch work. You ever think about taking on an apprentice permanently? Marlene asked one evening. Teaching someone the business? Maybe. Why? Because this ranch is bigger than just us now. Porter's family, the workers will eventually need to hire as we grow. It could become something substantial, a real operation. She paused. And because you're good at teaching, patient, the kid worships you. Ronan looked uncomfortable with the praise, but didn't deny it. I never thought about legacy before, about what comes after me. But yeah, maybe. Maybe that's something worth building toward. October brought the first snow, light dustings that melted by afternoon. Marlene stood at the kitchen window one morning watching it fall, thinking about how much had changed. 6 months ago, she'd arrived here with nothing. No money, no prospects, no hope. Just desperation and a willingness to accept whatever came. Now she had a home, a purpose, a husband she loved who loved her back, a future that stretched out with possibilities instead of closing in with despair. What are you thinking about? Ronan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. How strange life is. How the worst things can lead to the best things if you're willing to see them through. You talking about us? I'm talking about everything. Losing Thomas led me here. Your accident led to us meeting. Garrick's betrayal forced us to really see each other. She leaned back against him. None of it was good at the time, but it brought us to this, to now. So you're saying we should be grateful for tragedy? I'm saying tragedy doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the middle. The hard part you have to get through to reach something better. She turned to face him. We could have let our circumstances destroy us. We chose to let them forge us instead. That's what makes the difference. He kissed her, slow and deep. When'd you get so wise? When I stopped running from hard things and started facing them. She smiled against his lips. You helped with that. Showed me what real strength looks like. We helped each other. That's how this works. That evening, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set over mountains dusted with snow. The air was cold enough to see their breath, but neither wanted to go inside yet. There was something peaceful about sitting together in the quiet, no words needed. I used to hate this time of day, Ronan said eventually. Sunset meant another day survived, but also another night coming. Another stretch of hours being alone with pain and darkness. And now? Now it means I get to be with you. Do the legwork, talk about the day, make plans for tomorrow. It's my favorite part now. He squeezed her hand. Funny how the same time of day can mean completely different things depending on who you're sharing it with. That's true of everything, I think. Places, experiences, even pain. The company changes what it means. They sat in silence a while longer, then Ronan spoke again. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. What? That first night, when we got here and I told you the rules, separate rooms, no expectations, just a practical arrangement. Did you think it would stay that way? Or did you hope it might become more? Marlene thought about it honestly. I didn't let myself hope for anything beyond survival. Hoping hurt too much when things didn't work out. So I just focused on getting through each day, doing my job, earning my place. She paused. But somewhere along the way, I started hoping anyway. Started wanting this to be real instead of just practical. Scared me when I realized it, because caring meant being vulnerable to loss again. When did you know that it was real? The night you let me work on your leg for the first time, when you showed me the part of yourself you hated most and trusted me not to turn away. She looked at him. That's when I knew you saw me as more than just hired help, that maybe we were becoming something neither of us had planned for. For me, it was earlier, when you stood up to Garrick that first time he came around. You barely knew me, had no stake in my fight, but you stood your ground anyway. Saw through his polish to what was underneath. He smiled slightly. That's when I started thinking maybe I'd gotten lucky in the worst way. That maybe something good could come from all the bad. Lucky in the worst way, I like that. Describes us pretty well. Winter settled in hard. The first real storm hit in late November, dropping 2 feet of snow and trapping them inside for 3 days. They spent the time playing cards, reading by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. It was forced closeness that might have felt suffocating with the wrong person, but with each other it just felt comfortable. "We should do something for Christmas," Marlene said on the second day, watching snow pile against the windows. "I know it's not much, but we could invite the Porters over, make a meal, exchange small gifts, something to mark that we made it through." "Made it through the year or through the storm?" "Both." She smiled. "We survived a lot. Seems worth celebrating." They kept it simple. A turkey Porter had traded for, vegetables from the root cellar, bread Marlene baked. The Porter kids were excited about the gathering, their energy filling the house with noise and laughter that had been absent too long. Ronan gave Marlene a book she'd mentioned wanting, ordered special from Denver. She gave him new gloves, leather ones she'd worked on in secret, stitched carefully to fit his hands. They weren't expensive gifts, but they were thoughtful, chosen with care and given with love. "Best Christmas I've had in years," Ronan said later that night after everyone had gone home. "Maybe ever." "Because of the gifts?" "Because of the company. Because of having people here who actually care, who choose to be here." He pulled her close. "Because of you, mainly." "Well, you're stuck with me now, for better or worse, remember?" "I remember." He kissed the top of her head. "And I wouldn't change a thing." Spring came late but welcome. The snow melted, grass began growing, and the ranch woke up from winter dormancy. Ronan's leg was doing better than ever. Not perfect, would never be perfect, but functional enough that he could work a full day without collapsing. The exercises had paid off, patience and persistence making changes that seemed impossible 6 months ago. "Think I'll always need the cane?" he asked one morning, watching himself walk across the yard. "Probably, but does it matter?" "No." He said it with certainty. "No, it doesn't. The cane's just a tool. Doesn't define who I am anymore." "No, it doesn't." They expanded the cattle operation, buying breeding stock with money saved from the previous season's sales. Porter took on more responsibility, showing a talent for ranch management that surprised everyone, including himself. The place was becoming what Ronan had always envisioned, a working operation that could sustain multiple families and grow with time. "You ever think about what comes next?" Marlene asked one evening in May. They were sitting by the restored horseshoe pit, watching the sun paint the sky impossible colors. "Next after what?" "After we've rebuilt everything. After the ranch is secure and running well. What do we want then?" Ronan considered this. "I used to think the ranch was the end game, the whole point. But now I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the foundation, the stable base we needed before we could think about anything else." "Like what?" "Like family, kids maybe. If you want that." He said it carefully, like he was afraid of her answer. "I know we never discussed it, and I know you lost your first husband before you had the chance. So if you don't want—" "I want," Marlene said quietly. "I want a future with you. Whatever shape that takes." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He pulled her close, and they sat watching the sky darken, thinking about possibilities, about taking their rebuilt foundation and building something even larger on it. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just healing, but growing. "Whatever comes next," Ronan said, "we face it together." "Together," Marlene agreed. The next morning, she found him at the horseshoe pit. He'd repaired it over the winter, replacing rotted posts and laying fresh sand. Now he was standing there without his cane, balancing carefully, testing his weight distribution. "What are you doing?" "Seeing if I can throw a horseshoe. Haven't tried since before the accident. Figured it was time." He picked up a horseshoe, feeling its weight. "Used to be good at this. Won the county championship 3 years running. You don't have to prove anything." "I know, but I want to try anyway." He lined up his shot, adjusted his stance, and threw. The horseshoe sailed through the air and landed with a satisfying clang around the far post. "Ha! Still got it." Marlene watched him throw a few more, each one landing true. His balance wasn't perfect and his stance favored his good leg, but he was doing it, reclaiming something he'd thought was lost forever. "You know what this means?" she asked. "What?" "Means you can't use the leg as an excuse anymore when I beat you." He laughed, loud and genuine. "Is that a challenge?" "Might be." They played horseshoes until the sun was high, trading wins and losses and easy conversation. The game didn't matter. The score didn't matter. What mattered was that Ronan was playing it all, that he'd found his way back to something that brought him joy. That afternoon, Ronan rode into town for supplies and came back with news. Garrick's ranch is being auctioned. Creditors are liquidating everything to pay his legal debts. Are you thinking of buying it? Me? No, don't need more land right now, and that place has too many bad memories. He paused. But I talked to Porter. He's interested. Says he could get a loan, maybe buy it with a couple of other families, turn it into a cooperative operation. That's a good idea. Better than letting it go to some outsider who doesn't understand the area. That's what I thought. Ronan smiled. Told him I'd vouch for him at the bank, help him with the paperwork. Least I can do after what he risked testifying. You're a good man, Ronan Mercer. I'm a man who got lucky. Everything good in my life now came from other people taking chances on me. Porter testified when it would have been safer to stay quiet. You married me when you could have found easier options. Sheriff Dawes investigated when he could have dismissed it as family drama. I'm just trying to pay that forward. That was the thing about Ronan that Marlene loved most. He'd been broken down to nothing, rebuilt himself piece by piece, and come out of it not bitter, but grateful. Not closed off, but open. He'd learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and asking for help wasn't surrender. That sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit you couldn't do it alone. By midsummer, the ranch was thriving. The cattle were healthy, contracts were secure, money was steady, if not abundant. Porter had successfully purchased Garrick's old place with 2 other families, creating the cooperative Ronan had envisioned. The whole area was recovering from the damage Garrick had inflicted, knitting back together stronger than before. Marlene was in the garden one afternoon when she felt Ronan come up behind her. His footsteps were quieter now, more even. He wrapped his arms around her waist and she leaned back against him, comfortable and content. Got a letter from Catherine, he said. Final one, she says. She's getting remarried. Wanted me to know. Wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings. Are there? No, just acknowledgement that we both moved on, that what we had is really over. He paused. She thanked me for meeting with her, said it gave her closure, wished us well. That's good. Clean ending. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. Strange how things work out. If Garrick hadn't lied to her, she might have stayed. I might never have needed to marry you. We might never have... Don't. Marlene turned to face him. Don't go down that road. We can't know how things would have gone differently. All we know is what happened, and what happened brought us here. You're right. He cupped her face in his hands. I just want you to know I wouldn't change it, any of it, even the hard parts, because they led to you. Same. All of it was worth it to get to this. That evening they sat on the porch watching another sunset, the ritual that had become their favorite part of each day. The sky was putting on a show, gold and pink and purple layered like paint. The kind of sunset that made you stop whatever you were doing just to watch. You know what I realized? Ronan said. We never really chose each other, not at first. We were both just desperate and out of options. That's true. But we choose each other now, every single day, and that matters more. He took her hand. The beginning was necessity. But what we built from that, that's all choice. All us deciding this is what we want. It is what I want. Marlene squeezed his hand. You're what I want. This life, this ranch, these quiet evenings watching the sky, all of it. Good, he smiled. Because you're stuck with me. Broken leg, stubborn pride, all of it. Wouldn't have it any other way. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began appearing. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more reasons to keep building and fighting and choosing each other. But tonight, they just existed together in the peace they'd fought so hard to find. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything they'd survived for, everything they'd hoped for in the darkest moments when hope seemed impossible. They'd started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, had become allies in a fight neither expected, had transformed that alliance into partnership, that partnership into love. And through it all, they'd learned what strength really meant. Not the absence of breaking, but the courage to heal. Not doing it alone, but finding someone willing to carry the burden alongside you. The ranch that had almost been lost was saved. The man who'd been broken was rebuilding. The woman who'd had nothing had found everything. Not because life got easier, but because they'd learned to face the hard parts together. And that made all the difference. As full dark settled over the ranch, Ronan stood carefully, extending his hand to Marlene. She took it and rose, and together they walked inside to the home they'd fought for, to the life they'd chosen, to the future they were building one difficult, beautiful day at a time. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold night air. Inside was warmth and lamplight, and the quiet comfort of two people who'd found their way home, not to a place, but to each other. And that was the real victory. Not defeating Garrick, or saving the ranch, or reclaiming what had been lost, but learning that home wasn't something you were born into or stumbled upon. It was something you built, brick by careful brick, with someone who was willing to build it alongside you. Someone who saw your broken pieces and didn't turn away. Who stood with you through the worst and celebrated the best. Who understood that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up day after difficult day and choosing each other anyway. That was what they'd found. What they'd created from necessity and desperation and stubborn refusal to give up. A love forged in fire, tested by betrayal, and proven strong enough to withstand whatever came next. As Marlene banked the fire for the night and Ronan locked the doors, both of them knew that challenges would come. Life wasn't done testing them, but they also knew they'd face those challenges the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with honesty and determination and the hard-won wisdom that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the worst. They climbed the stairs hand in hand, heading not to separate rooms but to the life they'd built together. And as they closed the door on another day, both felt the deep satisfaction of knowing they'd earned this peace, this partnership, this love. It hadn't been given to them. They'd fought for it, bled for it, built it from nothing but necessity and hope and stubborn determination. And that made it real in a way easy love never could be. The lamp went out. Darkness settled. And two people who'd started as strangers lay together in the quiet, grateful for the hard road that had brought them here, for the choices they'd made, for the future they were building, for each other. And that was enough. That was everything.
There we go. Okay. I got it on. But yeah, so we do a little bit of everything here. Fiber art, so knitting, crocheting, 3D printing, and 3D modeling. We also have dabbled in Lego Studio to recreate one of our favorite consoles, Game Gear. And then also we do some pottery as well, and cosplay. Cosplay was my gateway into all the makers and crafting. So you will be seeing some industrial sewing machine usage coming soon. We're going to be sewing some leather together and then working on our cosplay for that, for the Enshroud Reaper. And then we also have some knitting machine streams upcoming as well, eventually. And modeling, of course. But yeah, we've got all the things happening soon. Using one of the thicker diamond painting pens does work. Works for hands that are a little less able to hold. Oh, that's good. That's awesome. Soon. I know, Red. Exactly, soon. Well, this week, honestly, it's gonna happen this fucking week, finally. Because my energy level is much better, thankfully. Oh, that's good to hear that they have. Your grocers are the way to go.